way, comes back into the inner earth, does its turnstile thingy, and pops out over here. D comes out over here and ends up going over here. Again, reversing spin. So you have clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, and it comes this way, and it forms the parallel, right? Then the energy circulates back in, does its little trip, reverses its spin, and it goes from, let me see, the E, F. Yeah, we go to F. F goes back in. F should come out somewhere. Okay. F. Yeah, it comes back out. F to G. Yeah, F, G. Comes back out. And this is the counterclockwise rotating one. This is our system. So this is the last one. We're on the system, the last one to get fed, right? It circulates through. But we're also the closest one to go back. Because what it does after it circulates through here is goes from G to H, goes back in. There's the turnstile thingy. And it comes back down and circulates through here and goes back and starts spiraling up. So this is the path that leads back in. The H goes back in to the final twist and going up into inner earth and then climbing, making the climb again. So we're actually the closest space to the ascension. This would be the easiest one to ascend from. It also gives you some interesting little insights into where things come from. Because of this circulation of energy, a manifestation would say, if it was created here, it would then come here, then come here, then come here. Now we have our parallel self over here. It's a little bit higher frequency than we are, resonates a bit higher than we do. Where do our thoughts come from? Where does our energy come from? It circulates through our parallel selves and then moves in and circulates through our system. Same thing with Earth and parallel Earth, or the galaxy and parallel galaxy. Now, this is just the basic flow chart. And the center, the Eka, which is the inner lower God world in the Veka system, is the turnstile. It's through here that all of the frequencies come from down and circulate through and then come back around. So it's the turnstile. Now, this goes to another level. Oh, I'm back over here. I think I have something I might as well show you here. Yes, there's another one that had me dyslexic for a while. Trying to figure out, how do those radial bodies form? Like, what are they shaped like? Can't it just be simple? You know, circle within circle within circle. That's the kindergarten way. They said, here's how they really form. Okay, if we look again, here's the Kathara grid. Ours, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through 12. Okay. Now notice these guys link. This is why you have some of them that have 2 numbers. You'll see this all through these. They're numbers where if you look at it running this way, that same spot is, goes with both of the grids. They're overlaps. But this one, 1 through 12. All right. Our density 1 radial body, our D1 through 3 radial body, which would be this dark line here, this littlest one. It manifests upward this way, coming out of the lock that's called LZ. When you see an LZ, it means 0 point lock, a lock at 0 point. And then the next one up would be like L1, and then L2, L3, but the LZ is the 0 point lock that connects to D13. Okay? So our first one comes up this way from LZ. Then our density 2, which is dimensions 4, 5, and 6, comes out of L3 and comes down this way, I believe. Yes, I think that's density 2. Yeah. Then density 3 comes out of L1 and goes up this way. And density 4 comes out of the center point, which is the D10, 11, 12, and comes this way. It's half of one. Here's half of what's actually, there's actually 2 of these together. We're showing half of each one. This is where D13 and density 5, the primal light fields, and the divine blueprint, density 4, link together. That's that, the Vesica Pisces point. This structure becomes important because this is the structure. Remember how the Kathara grid fits in your body? This is where your radial bodies are. They're not just here, here, here. They are in the field in certain areas. And when you begin to work with the Veka codes, soon we'll see where Veka codes fit with this. As you open and release Veka codes, you're releasing lock codes, which means you're allowing the different levels of the body to swivel into the same angular rotation. This is the merging of the huva bodies through the radial bodies, which allows all of the parts to come together. And eventually, at the end of this, you'll see where it forms the crux and seta, which is the full, Akasha Merkaba. And it's really cool. It's like, from what I hear, this is a vehicle you can like really go all over in once you build a full one. But right now, our main concern is building enough of one that we could actually get through an inner earth gate if we needed to. Okay, now that's level 1. And it creates, I don't need it. You can read this if you want to on your own. I don't have to go into this level of detail, because if I do, we're going to be here until midnight, and I want to get you doing the things, not just talking at you. And I've talked at you a lot already. It gives you some interest. It gives. I hope so. We worked really hard on these stupid graphs. Oh, by the way, these are also symbol codes that you can play with in optical pineal induction. And I hear they do some very interesting things as far as accelerating the process. Okay. The next level is, now remember, there's 4 of those, right? 4 Vekas and an Eka at the center. Okay. Well, 4 Vekas with the Eka at the center been inside of another Cathara grid. Okay. This one is called the Akasha. This is where the name for our little necklace shapes, that Akasha code, comes from. So there's another set of gates that are the bigger gates. The Akasha is the middle God world, where this one was the lower God world, the Eka, and then you had lower than that in frequency. You had the 7 higher and 7 lower heavens. They're the Vekas. Now, the Vekas, those 4 things, these are the Vekas, these 4 Cathara grids interwoven that form the 7 higher and 7 lower heavens. These are called quadrants. Okay? These are actually maps that are used to be able to know how, once you do have a Merkaba, how you drive it places. It's like a road map, literally. So you know how to get from what gate to what gate. So these are quadrants. Vekas have quadrants. Vekas exist within an Akasha. An Akasha is one corridor. There's more. Yeah, there's more of these. So you have another set of gates. These are the middle God world gates. And again, they would form the 3, and then the 1, which is part of the 7. That implies there's another parallel one of these someplace. All right, but that's connected. All right, this one has 22 manifestation fields in the Akasha middle God worlds, where the Veka system had 15 manifestation fields. Let's see. And these little charts here are just explaining which each of those are. And I'm not going to go into all of that right now because it's enough to make me dyslexic. And I want to get through the maps first. We maybe, if we have time, we can go back to them. But it's here. It's worth reading the little info bites that are on the sides if you want to understand more about these. But there you have 4 that formed the 5th. Actually, the center one formed the 4 Vekas. And this level is the Akasha. These are called sea locks, okay? Corridor locks on the Akasha. These shaped ones, the bigger ones. It's another set of locks that you need to go through. If you want to get into the middle God worlds, you have to first get into the lower God worlds, and then from there, you need to activate the coding that goes with the sea locks. Because the sea locks will let you into the density levels of a Cathara grid system. All right? That's the only way to get into the gates, is to get into the density system first, to get into the system itself, before you can pick what gate you want to go into. Okay, next level, please. It's part of a bigger thingy. There's 4 of those, and they all have all those in it, right? After a while, it's very hard to keep count of how many of who do you have. But anyway, this one here is called the Akasha A. The Akasha A is called, it's crystal, let's say it's crystal or it's Cathara grid, is called a spectra, where you had these guys, the Akashas, that were corridors and the Vekas that were quadrants. This is a spectra. This is where you start getting into different types of reality fields that even though they have density levels, they're very different. Because there's a chart I'll show you at the end here where they're all base 12 systems, but their subharmonics change. The minimum is 12 subfrequency bands per dimension. Then it goes up to 12, times 1.5, and then it's times 2, and then it's times 3, and then it's times 4. So you end up with 48 in the biggest one. You have 48 subfrequency bands in each dimension. So these are, these are the indigo worlds. These are the worlds where, like, the indigo children come from. That's where their 48 strand and such DNA templates correspond to. But we're not quite there yet. This is the Akasha. This is the Akasha A. That's the first higher God world. This gets really cool when we go higher, because at some place it's got to stop, right? I mean, there's got to be an end up there somewhere, a 0 point someplace. That's what I was saying. I mean, this thing is spreading out over my table, all right? I mean, we started with one normal-sized Cathara grid and took it from there, and the one became this big, and then that became this big, and that was like, uh-oh. So I had to figure out how to make the others smaller to be able to, keep fitting it on the thing. But it still holds all of the coding to it because you got every one of them. And it gets really neat when we go up another level. Which one is this? Is this the biggie one? Now, this one's called, this is called the Akasha Aya, or the God Core highest God worlds. This is where a cluster technically begins and then, manifests inward from there, creating all of these things. So it's not as the only cluster, but this is how they cluster. There's others of these in the cosmic, or not our cosmic matrix, but there's other cosmic matrices. Now, this thing here is the Akasha Aya. These guys here are those Akasha A spectra. These guys here are the Akasha corridors, and these little guys in here are the vectors, or the Vekas, with the 7 higher and 7 lower heavens, times, the 4. And each one of them forms an inner one. Remember the Eka that formed with the first 4 cluster? Every level where the 4 come together forms this inner pathway. So you have the Eka that is the first lower inner God world. But then you have one that forms in the middle and in the higher ones all the way up. And it's the path of the middle pillar, it's often called. But this would contain, the one that's at the center would contain everything that's in all the ones around it. All right, so this one, the big one, contains all of these, a replica of all of those systems. Now, this gets fun because we got to find out, well, where did this Cathara grid come from in the first place? All right, let's try to take it up. And this is where I really start to appreciate the symbols that we were given. This is where we find out about the Ruche, right? The Ruche, which is the center, the core of the Akasha. It's these Stargate situations that this is hard to describe, but I'll do my best. 1, the Manal void, right there. Okay? In the beginning was the void. I'm going to try to work myself through this. I was going absolutely crazy trying to get this down. Because it's hard. There's so many things going on at once. It's like, what was first? Well, 4 things were first. Sort of. So, let me see if I can explain this. What I'm doing is I'm getting dyslexic. I'm going down and I'm going up at the same time. I'm kind of going in the middle. Let me see how I want to explain it. Coming up. Now, we just moved from way down up, expanding up into this. The way it actually happens is it creates down and within itself. Okay? So maybe if I approach it from there, I'll feel better. It starts with what we talked about before, the Mano, the Mane, and the Ire. If Source created the first Partak unit, the Mano, point of attention, the Mano field, it would be the void here. And then within the void created the sound, or the Ire, here. and the interaction between the void and the ire created the light, the mane. All right. Now we're at, these would be the first Partakai, Partake, mane, and Partakam, but it actually Partakai, Partakam, and Partake would be the sequence it would be created from. Now, I'll read this and see if I can. This is the part I was wondering. Can I explain this yet? We have the Mano void, which is the first Partakai unit of God force attention. It's the still point or 0 point. It contains the embedded mathematical programming of the base 12 point Kathara Christos template for perpetual eternal life. So this, when that Mano intention was set, the Mano itself held the mathematics, the mathematical program for the base 12 systems. And they were the eternal life, perpetual life systems where energy would continue to recirculate itself through source. It wouldn't just be expended and then, go away. The base 12 system forms on the Rushe, core form now. So the Ire base 12 point pre-sound vibration fields, first particum contraction point. My lips are tired. First particum contraction point. That would be this. So first was the void, then was the first point of contraction, sound vibration of the Ire. And then the Mane, base 12, pre-light oscillation field, the first Partakai expansion point. That would be this one here. Now, together, the three God forces, the first 3 cells, these are considered the first 3 cells of creation, the first 3 radial bodies of creation. They create the 24-point cosmic Kathara grid template. All right, 12 here. Now, remember, these hold the original mathematical programming, and they create literally the first Kathara template. We have the first large one, the Mane Kathara, and then you have the little tiny one in here, which is the Ire Kathara, the 24 points. That's the first manifestation of the Kathara template. Okay, now, over here, I want to see something Now, these first 3 cells collectively are referred to as the unici, the point of all union. That's when anybody that's had the ordinations or anything, when we say Holy Order of the Unici, this is what we're talking about. This is the place in God that we're talking about, where the oneness all comes together. Okay. Now, let me see. 12 Rushe scepters. Okay. There's an interesting way. If I could describe this, I deserve a medal. There's an interesting way that the Rushe pattern forms. You have your first 3 cells, okay? Your first 3, Ire, Mane, Mano. And you have a mathematical program that builds up into this, but it builds up into it this way. There's a after the first 3 are created, the next one is created and polarizes and forms these 2, and then it rotates and shifts 45 degrees, and this one creates that one, and this one creates that one, and then they simultaneously each shoot out another one. Now, each of these are rotating in some of them clockwise, some of them counterclockwise. They're setting the first fields. It's these fields that form these points, the crossover points. If you look at these things, they form a cycle, that there would be 3 crossover points for each set of 2 of them. They actually form the points. These are the repeating crossover points as these fields cycle, as these units of frequency cycle, these arcs. These are arcs. They're like pillars. They're the original first standing columnar waves that aren't even light waves yet. They're the pre-light things, but they're frequency patterns. They're beginning of frequency patterns. And they create arcs. The arcs are what create the form of the spheres. They literally create a template that energy can move on that creates spherical formations. So, the Rushe is the core mathematics that first emerges out of the 3. And from the Rushe and its points crossing through each other, it's 12 points cycling through each other at different clockwise and counterclockwise rotations. the 24 consistent points of crossover and overlap form, and that's what gives you the Mane Kathara and the Ire Kathara. Now, all this is programmed into the Mane by the intention, the original intention. Any natural system is built on these things, but you can take a piece of what's natural and make it unnatural, and that's what happened as far as the fallen angelics and the black hole matrices. You can rip a scalar template apart, take a piece of it, and make something else out of it that it was never intended to be. And that's what's happened in the black hole systems. They need to be healed because there's nowhere else for any energy to go. It can't run away from God, even if it wants to. Black holes implode in on themselves and go completely back to part chi, part K, and part cum units, and are then reintegrated. Bless you. Are then reintegrated into Source. So either go back knowing or you go back not knowing. But either way, you're going back. You know, it's like the fallen angelics seem to forget this. If they really would get it, they'd realize that it's futile to do what they're doing, but they don't. So anyway, this is a very powerful one to meditate with. I haven't even tried it cross-eyed yet. Yeah, I felt cross-eyed by the time I was done doing it. Yeah, believe me. Yeah. So the scepters, the 12 Ruche scepters, these points, these original pillars, these anchoring rods of frequency, are considered when we talk about the scepter codes, the scepter codes are, you have Veka codes first, which go with the Veka worlds. Remember those 4, 7 higher and lower heaven spaces? You have Eka codes that go with the Akasha level. And then you have scepter codes that begin to open the Akasha level to the higher God worlds that begin to allow these frequencies to anchor, the arcs to come in and anchor more fully. They're teaching us about these things because we're going to need to bring some of these in order to hold the integrity of our bodies and to help hold the integrity of the planetary body in some of the changes that are going to be taking place in the next few years because of the drama that's taking place on the planet. These pillars have the ability to anchor and hold divine blueprint intact. They're going to be anchoring in the planetary grids, and the parts that can anchor will be the parts that, let's say, might rock but won't roll. Let's put it that way. There's going to be some earth changes, the severity of which depends on how strongly the 12 pillars. We've talked about the 12 pillars before in relation to what's called the 4 faces of man-grid, but these were very, very stepped-down versions of these pillars. At that time, when we were just activating the 4 faces of man-grids, it wasn't necessary to fully open the higher God world gates. It was simple enough to just downstep them from the Trion Miage field level, which is called the Akasha level. Now they have to run them from the top level because of what we'll talk about in the Metatronic workshop. Yeah, because of the beastie thing, right? We'll show you what kind of messy mechanism that is. So we're being prepared now with we still have to work through the sequence of Veka codes in order to get to where we can use Eka codes to bring the next level in. But we're being shown where they fit and what the process is that we're a part of. Not just here, play with this code. You know, we'll see where the codes go, what they do, so we can begin to understand what we're trying to open in our bodies. And then we can go back to the fun part of it's really not that hard to do it, because it comes down to singing and, you know, looking cross-eyed at pretty pictures. I mean, it's not that hard. You know, it's spinning. Yeah. It's really not that difficult. But when this material came through, these maps have not been here for thousands and thousands of years. They are literally gate maps, where if you look at all the little numbers on them, it shows, I mean, we already have the list that shows our universal stargates, right? It shows you, you know, where Sirius B is, that's gate 6, the Arcturus, gate 7, it shows you all that. So you know that much. But this shows where these connect into the other fields. It doesn't bother putting names on them because they wouldn't make any sense to us right now anyway because we don't know those places yet. But, or we probably do, we just don't remember. The first step is getting into the lower God world, which is the inner earth and the inner, it's not just earth, it's the inner system. And that's what we're building this Merkaba for. In order to get into these systems, you need the Triveka 3-way Merkaba. They can go in 3. It can go diagonal as well as vertical and horizontal. I think that's enough right now. There will be more on this, and there will be even clearer explanation on this as I learn more about it. Because when this stuff was coming through, I just remember like my brain felt like it was tied in a million knots. You know, what was that again? Like, how many of them are there? You know? I hope you, okay, and this is what it forms, all right? Remember, this is the thing we just looked at here. The Akasha Aya crystal. You have the Mane Cathar grid and the Ire Cathar grid in there. Now what that forms, these are the first 15 cells. This is the God seed, where you have, let's see, one starts here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 was numbered, and then it got whited out, and I didn't put it back. 8 is this one. Okay, the first big one. Right? 8. Then it goes 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. They are the 15 spheres of the God seed. When you see, let's say, artificial life seeds made of 7, that's taking a core out and doing something else with it and disconnecting it from the primal fields that it's supposed to be connected to. That's what certain sciences, like Metatronic sciences, are built upon. And there is a whole universal structure that has built itself upon that mutation, and it's trying to move us into its space. So we'll talk about that more in Metatronic workshop. But this is the true God seed, and this in here. If you can see this little shape in here, anybody see that yet? It's that little Merkaba thing again, that funny looking little umbrella. The Akasha Merkaba. And within it, there's a field that is a Manau field. There's a field here that is an Ire field. And these actually move. So these are spinning. You know, they're rotating. They rotate this way and they rotate this way. And then there's the big Mane field. And then there's the cosmic void that would be around it. This set of fields is the crux and Seda. And I'll show you what it looks like in smaller terms in the bodies in a minute. I think we can put that one up too. Yeah, that's worth showing. This shows you without so much of this detail in and around there. I never figured out which was top. This is a real rough one. We're on to scribbling handwriting at this point. Didn't have time for paste ups. Okay. So this is the field that this little guy, this internal Merkaba, generates. It generates this massive crux and Seda field. You have this, and you have the shields. This one also forms a shield. So you have a shield and a loop and a long cord that allows the energy to continue to circulate all the way through. When you have the little Merkabas, they're not capable of bringing all of that frequency through. They form a spherical shape inside, which doesn't have its little tip on it yet. It doesn't have its open feed line. So it's a static field. There are systems actually built on complete static field where they hold the bottom Merkaba so it can't spin, and they create an electrostatic sphere. And that's what the Metatronic universe is actually built on. It's a mutation of what would be part of the normal structure of the cosmos. But this little Merkaba here, that the whole universe is actually structured on this internal Merkaba and the fields it generates, these are the first radial body fields that it actually generates and holds together. This applies directly to our bodies as well. Okay. Let me see the next one, please. Yeah. Before we get to our bodies, I want to show you this one. This one had me slightly dyslexic, too. Is that upside down? No, that's upside down. Yeah, I still go home. Where is this? Now, if you want to know how all those funny flat things that hook together apply to what we know of 3D reality, look at this one. Now, what we have here, let's take this one first. Okay? 0.1, 2, 3, 4. See, we have galactics going and universals going. These are the universal gates going up here. 4. It connects here. This one comes down here. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They're the ones that were named before, where you have like Sirius B and Arcturus and the universal set. They're coming in on this plane. The galactic ones are going on this plane. They're spiraling that way. This one spiraling this way. They form the orbital plane that our planets are all positioned on. These are our planets here. Each one of our planets holds a gate. And some of the planets that hold, the gates are still there, but some of the planets that were around them are missing, like Maldak at D5, D11, which was Chiron, and now there's a piece of it over here, and a piece of it is Pluto's moon. Here is where Nibiru used to be. When we get into the Metatronic workshop, we'll show you what they did with this orbit and what it's doing now, because it's not doing this. It used to be here. This used to be its orbital, the outermost ring in our natural orbital plane. Now this line here shows you the top of our galactic Merkaba. Okay, this one here, this little triangle type thing, that shows you the galactic Merkaba, and that's spinning, and each one of the planets has a little Merkaba that connects into that, and the energy goes down from the galactic Merkaba through the sun into all of the systems, and all of the galactic systems are structured that way. This is how planets happen to hang in space and happen to orbit around, their central suns and those kind of things. Now up here, this is where it gets fun. Where is inner Earth? You don't dig down. You have to go down to get up, because you need to go into the cave of creation where the 0-point lock is in order to get out of this density system. And then you would be going up here. You see that little matrix up there? It says 1, 2, and you can't even see 3. I don't even have 3 and 4 marked, but you see 11 and 11. You see 1, 2, and then 2 11s on each side of them. Those 11s would be 3 and 4 of the inner Earth gates. So gate 11s in the other time matrices plug in to the inner matrix, as does gate 12, which connects right in the center. So we would be going up into, I need to move this down a little, I think. Oh, I can see this better. Okay. Here is where the inner Earth fields are. This is a void area, which is like a magnetic repulsion zone, MANO field. And this is the radial body, trion-Miage light sound field, around the inner Earth densities. And they would have their density 1 would be D1, 2, 3, density 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 5, 6, etc. So they would be here. It runs partially off the page. What you'd have over here is our primal light sound field, and that creates wave spectra that actually come down and circulate. What you're looking at here is a big akasha, like a 3-dimensional akasha, as if you took a balloon and put the universe in it, and it had the little thing, where you're holding it, and the weight of it's pulling it down a little, so it's shaped like that. This here shows you each of the density levels and the voids, little voids between each density level in one 15-dimensional matrix. And then it shows you here where it takes you out into the Mano void field, the Mano, Mane, and Ire trion-Miage field body that is around one universal cluster. Now this would be a universal cluster with its light field. That is a Vecca. All right, this would be one Vecca. They go in sets of 4, right? So you have 1. Here's the one that goes with the one that goes with the universal one. This is the primal light field that goes with the universal. Here's the parallel over here, and the other one, the parallel light field, would be up that way. That would be one Vecca. Now remember all the other things that was connected to, right? So this gives you an idea, though, of how, in 3D terms, of what we know about our universe and how our planets hang out there in space and those kind of things. They literally fit into, and the Cathara grids run through and create the structure, the template, upon which this whole rotation is taking place, what puts the planets and stars and things there. So this kind of brings it home and shows you that, yes, there is a place called inner Earth. If you look at the places, the gate names, it gives you a clue as to where what is. We already know the universal gate names. They gave those to us a while ago. So we know there's a whole lot of things happening out in Orion, in the Orion star system. Now, if we're on our universal gate, here's Lyra again, 10, 11, and 12, right? This would be the Lyran gates over here. Now, there's a couple shortcuts, and that's what they're going to teach us about as far as the easiest way to get into the lower densities down and through here. But it's the first map I've seen in a long time that showed you where, really where, inner Earth is located in relation to our solar system. It's not just inner Earth, it's the inner matrix, it's the Eka matrix, and that is the entrance point to these other worlds. The heavens are nothing compared to these spaces. You know? These are the worlds where they are the eternal life worlds. Things that are in those worlds, beings that live in those worlds, are eternal life beings. There's only one area, and it would be the lower density, D1, 2, and 3 of the inner Earth, that has some finite life forms, some fallen race forms are there. They were there for bioregenesis and did what they did over here, just took over the place. And because things are usually as above, so below, it's probably because it happened there first that we're having all the problems. But they're doing all right comparatively. So there's another chart that shows some interesting things about, okay, so we got all these little spaces. We got Vekas, we got Akashas. Now, Vekas, Ekas, Akashas, Akasha A's, and Akasha Ayas. How do you decide where to go? Well, you have to know the DNA codes, first of all. Which lives in which system, how many frequencies you need to be in which system. And this chart's for that purpose. Yeah, thank you. This also begins to tell you where the codes go. Vekas, Ekas, scepters, Templar Ruche codes, which open the rods and the staffs of the pillars. Here you have the Veka world, 7 higher and lower heavens. Okay? The Kathara centers through all of these, the Kathara center numbers, are the subfrequency bands, the accretion level, and the DNA strand activation, sustained activation level that's required to be in these systems. Now, to be in a biological form in a system, you have to have 3 dimensions worth. Or you're, like a 2-dimensional being is not considered a biological being. You can be a cloud of consciousness. You can be a little kind of like, they have all sorts of little 2-dimensional thingies, but they're not considered biological forms. To be in a biological 3-dimensional form, you would have to be able to have the frequencies of at least 3 dimensions. So here is our system, where you have dimension 1, 2, and 3, corresponds to strand 1, 2, and 3. We're on a 12, base 12 system, 12 dimensions, but it's a base 12 because it has 12 sub-frequency bands in each of those 12 dimensions. When you get over to the Eka, the inner worlds, lower God worlds, it runs for, it's a 1.5 scale. So you times everything by 1.5, which means it goes from 1.5 strands to 18 strands in here. You would have to have a minimum of 4.5 strand sustained activation to live biologically in that space in order to have 1 density's worth of form. Okay, this is why they keep saying we need to get to a 4.5 accretion level, DNA activation level. Now, there's a couple little things they're doing that's brought that down, where they're actually going to try to bring us in between, bring some people in between here and here, so they can actually get it down to a 4.25 or something, where every little bit counts when you're trying to get people through gates they're not ready to go through. So now we get into the other level. So we get up to the Akasha middle God worlds. This is it's a base 24 system. I mean, there's 24 subfrequency bands in each of the 12 dimensions. So you times it by 2, and you have DNA strands 2 through 24. Beings with DNA strands 2 to 24 are in those spaces. And you can have others that pass through, but they're primarily populated by beings that have the range. You can have, they'd have their elemental kingdoms and things that are 2-dimensional. They wouldn't have full form, and they'd grow up to become 6-dimensional, which would be 3-dimensional there. Just notice how it goes up in frequency, each one, because of the sub-frequency band count. That means your strand accretion level would have to go up. For you to get into D3, which is technically D3 here, you have to have 6-strand activation over, for here. And that's the Akasha world, that's the middle God world. When you get over to here, it's times 3. It's a base 36 scale, 36 sub-frequency bands in each of 12 dimensions. And the strand count runs from 3 to 36. Okay? And then this one, the Akasha Aya, which takes you into the primal God seed worlds. And this will get you in through any of them. You can go up and completely disappear and go into it one from this. This is from 4 to 48 strands. The minimum to have a biology here is 12 strand. Okay, the minimum to have a biology here is 9 strand. The minimum to have a biology here is 6 strand, and the minimum to have one in the Eka, which is our first up, is 4.5 strand. the minimum to have one over in a Vecca is 3-strand. That's why we don't see our 2-strand beings running around. They don't have biological form quite the way we do. They're 2-dimensional, like a piece of paper. All right, they're still conscious, they're still aware, but it's a reality field that if you stand sideways, you disappear. You know, they don't have height, width, and depth. They only have 2. 2 dimensions, 2 flash lines. So this basically gives you an idea of what's required to go where. You have the base 12, the base 12.5, base 24, base 36, and base 48 systems, base referring to how many subfrequency bands are in each of the 12 dimensions. Okay, yeah, just about done. Vecca codes, yes, let's find out the mystery of the Vecca codes. I was so happy when I finally got this down. I fought with this one for ages and ages. Yeah. Okay. Now, what we have down in the corner are the list of the Vecca codes, 1 through 12. And it starts with the ones we already had. Bivecca, Trivecca, Qvecca, Davecca, Ravecca, Ayaheya. The 2 we're going to learn, the Liheya and we're going to learn the Liheya and the Urimanu. We're learning one of these and its corresponding one here. They're starting to give us combinations where these are considered the low Veccas, the Mano codes, these down here, 6, 7, 8, and 9, the Ayaheya, Liheya, Risheya, and Shaheya. Then the last 3, the 10, 11, and 12, these are called the blood crystal codes because they begin to build the crystallizations within the blood and within the hormone body that prepare the body for the celestaline activation. And it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's the beginning of the building of the blood crystals. The Urimanu goes with the Liheya. Now, we go back to our map of the Veccas, right? Remember, they're Veccas, they're universes, but they're also the structure of how the Cathara grids plug into each other, and your body has a Cathara grid, just like the Earth has a Cathara grid, and it plugs into its parallel and to its light field. Now, the Ayaheya, if we look at the numbers on the Veccas, 1, I believe, is at the center, I think, yeah. Code number 1 opens D12 center, lock 4. So 1 would be in here. I didn't put it there because it would have covered the rest of the stuff, so you wouldn't be able to see what it was opening. But I put the reference to it here. Code number 1 would be there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you look at them, 1 was the Bivecca, the center. 2, Trivecca. 3, Qvecca. 4, Davecca. 5, Ravecca. Okay. 6, there's another note somewhere here for 6, because that opens the next one over here, the parallel one to D13, I believe. Let me see. That's written here someplace. I was trying to find places. Yeah, code number 6 opens D13, center lock 4. So that opens the next level of this one. So 6 would be there. Then 7. Now 6 is the Ayaheya. That's the one we just started working with in the Dance for Life. Okay. 7, 8, 9, 10. 7 is the Liheya, the one we're going to work with. Now, then there's 8 and 9. And there's this 10 down here. This is the Urimanu. We're going to be starting this, working with this one and this one. They will automatically activate those. So it's the faster way than having to do each one of them. Now, what these do, if you look at this section, now remember this is your, let's say this is you in our system here, right? This is our light field, all right, our primal light field. That's your parallel over there, and that's their light field. The object of the game is to get all of you in one place, all of your radial bodies into one grid, right? Then you're all you and all there. All right. Now, the process of doing this, when we came into manifestation, we spiraled in clockwise. There's a natural counterclockwise rotation that takes place, but it's not just direct, you reverse it this way. There's a folding up process that takes place where when you activate these first, which are the high Veccas, that opens the locks here, 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 and here, and here, and here. The higher heavens locks on the light fields. So these begin to merge, and it begins to pull half of these in. So if you see these little numbers, 2, 3, 4, 5, that means half of this one goes when they go, And then the other half goes when the other ones go. And the same up here. So when you get those activated, you got part of yourself pulled together. You've freed these two up to shift into the same axis alignment. Then, once you do these guys, you've freed up the parallel and newer density worlds up. So you do the light fields first, as above, so below. First they go, the high Vekas, then the low Vekas go. Now, the low Vekas are the 6 through 9, so you have 6, 7, 8, 9. The mid Vekas, and they're called mid Vekas because they have to do with the middle, not because they're somewhere in between high and low. That's what I thought it was, but it's because they have to do with the middle. 10, 11, and 12. 10, 11, and 12 are this. 10, 11, and 12 takes you into density 1 of the Eka. Now, you have Eka codes that do the same thing with the 4. Now, these are the 4 quadrants of the Vekas, right? So the Veka codes are the quadrant codes. They open the locks on the quadrants that allow those separate bodies, those separate radial bodies, to all blend together, to pull together, and to shift into one angular rotation of particle spin. So it folds up your Veka, and you can go into the Eka. The next step would be going to the Akasha. All right. You have a set of Eka codes that run in the same sequence, and they're right here. I put those right here. We haven't been given those. Well, we have, actually. We weren't formally given those, but if you look at the names of them, the Rushe, well, we already know what that is. The Akasha A, if you look at the maps, we already know what that is. The name of the maps is the name of the code. These are the codes that go with here. And I didn't even know that was going on until later. I was like, oh, that's cool. Oh, look at that, we do have those. Yeah. The Akasha, we got that. Yeah. The Akasha Aya. And the Rishayana, that's the only one we don't have yet as far as the first section of these. So there will be more to come. But this is the beginning. We're working the Vekas, and the next stage we'll be working with the Ekas. Very simple optical pineal induction, and the Suriyas is what they're using now. The Suriyas are a challenge. I end up feeling very biologically disorganized. Whenever it's just a good way to put it. Not sure what to put where. I haven't even got to the point. I've been so busy working on this stuff that you're much better at the stuff than I am. I haven't even got to the point where I can do the words and do the things at the same time because I haven't had time to practice. So, what? You have 15 minutes? Okay. Oh, okay, good. Okay, I thought you meant all together. Okay. Yeah, we're almost getting to playtime. Yeah. I'm serious. Where you don't have to listen to stuff and look at stuff anymore. We're going to just start like doing something. And I appreciate your tenacity, and you're still staying there and you're still awake. But anyway, this one gives you the key to the Vekas and the Ekas. The names of them are here. We're progressively being given what they look like, what the mathematics are. This is what the mathematics loosens. And what that looks like in the biological form, there is one somewhere here. They had the bodies. Not that one, this one. Yeah. This one here? No, this one. It is this one. It was on top. This one. Now remember how the radial bodies were kind of funny shaped? This is up and down here. That's right? Yeah. Okay. Well, the Cathara grid within your body has the same strange layout of the radial bodies, where you have the density 1, the density 2, the density 3, and the density 4. The Vekas would open up these, and they would allow these to spin into one. So they would all merge into one, and that would let you turn into light. Because what it would do is build a Crux and Seda Merkaba field, which would allow you to turn into light and move into whatever space you desired by using something called crux codes. We haven't been given any crux codes yet, but every place in the scalar grid of the cosmos has a crux code. It's its signature location code. It's like if you look at computer pictures, you know how they use pixels and things to do little dots to make pictures. You can make big, beautiful photographs with them and stuff like that. Every one of those dots would have a name. It would have a mathematical coordinate. Well, the universe works the same way. The cosmos works the same way. So once we get to where we can build these fields, the next process is learning about what codes go where. Like, we already know the ones that are the Vekas, they will open the gates, the locks, the keys to the locks to go into the inner earth gates. Now, if you want to be absolutely specific about what part of inner earth you want to go into, there's a series of locational codes that you would simply visualize the symbols or hum the tones that went with those locations to, once you were flying, get you there. So you didn't end up in another galaxy far, far away that you weren't aiming for. You know? So there is a way to drive this thing called a Merkaba, but first you need to build it before you need to worry about driving it. But this is some of the things to come. I wonder if by the time we're on Dance for Freedom or Dance for Joy, if they're going to get into that. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep up with them if they do, because this is hard to even get this much down on paper. These graphs took a long time. They're really hard to do. You know, these will be fine-tuned at some point. At least we know what the words are. They just have to be typeset now. But this, just like the one that was in the center of the Akasha Aya, of the universal, the cosmic structure, it forms around your body as well. You have the 6-point thing here, and the little other 6-point one here. Here's your shields. This one here is your Maharic shield. This is your Telluric shield. That's your Dradic shield. That's your Turic shield. This one here is your Rishik shield, the one that runs vertically and spins vertically. And then this one, see this one running on the diagonal? That's your Eonic shield of the Eoni. The Eoni, inner earth people of the Yanas, which are the ascended masters. This is the one that carries the ability to take it into the third axis, where it can go diagonal as well as vertical and horizontal. So once the Eonic shield is activated, which corresponds to the Kundalini primal sound fields, it's a sound shield. Once that one's activated and spinning with the rest of them, it forms a natural Crux and Seda pattern, an Ankh, around your body. You would have here the Mano window. This would be like your the neutron window, but it's around your body. It's also inside your cells, inside your atoms. And then you would have an Ire capsule around it, and then you would have the Mane capsule around that, and then there would be the void around there. This is the vehicle that would allow you to literally imagine a place you want to go and pop up there. I think it's been a very long time since, I know even, I'm trying to feel back in my cellular memory record, even in like 10,500 BC, they didn't have this available. This has not been available. You need D12 to build this at a minimum. So literally, this Merkaba hasn't been built and used on this planet since 208,216 BC, when the grids went down and could not hold a 12 code activation. It's pretty phenomenal that we're getting it back now. We're getting it back, and it's like, wow, it seems like something completely new because it's been so long. But this is what we're trying to build, or going to build, those of you who stick with it. This is what ascension is all about. This is what religion was supposed to be all about. It was about teaching you how to be one with God, which meant you had the right and the privilege to move about as God, because you were a face of God. And it meant you had a responsibility also as a guardian and keeper of the universe and the Christos way. It's freedom, and it's joy, and it's belonging. They're the very 3D qualities that you get out of working with these things. So, I think we actually cleared the theory, did we? We have cleared the theory. We'll show you the 2 more new symbols, and I think I need to take just a 5-minute run to the bathroom.
They have the symbols on it.
Okay, and then we're going to go into action time. Okay? Which means you don't have to listen to any more lecture, but we'll show you the symbols, and we'll begin working with the Suriyas.
They have the symbols in their pack.
Yeah, you have. Yeah, I like to put them up on the board too, though, in case I want to talk about them. Okay. This is the Urimanu, and this is the Leheya symbols. They're the next ones. They're number 7 and number 10, if we remember, on the Vekas.
You're the man who got the 2 M's, by the way.
Yeah, that's a...
This one.
How'd that happen? We'll find them. 2 of the same ones.
I think.
What, honey? This one. Okay. I think it'll be a good idea to do a 5 minutes, because once we get into this, we'll be like spinning and things, and like it's a good time for a bathroom run. At least I need to. We will go over the Sariyas, the original 3 that were given in Dance for Life, because we haven't done those yet. I was saving them for the end to do them all together, and then the new 3 that together are the Sariyas that build the silent sound pillars that go with the upper Mani Merkaba. Now there's going to be 6 more that have to do with the lower Ire Merkaba field. All right, and we'll progressively through the other 2 dance for courses will be given, those in pieces. But we have 6 of them to play with now. And I did get them down in at least scribbly stick figure form, so hopefully that will help. It helped me once I got them down, so hopefully it will help you guys too. They're going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back and bring your voices and your spinning shoes with you. Ooh. Okay. Now, we got quite a bit to cover that was supposed to be done last night. This is going to be interesting because, again, somebody let me know at about 5 of 3, because we can go to 3:15. And Ma'a wants to wrap up. He's going to let us know once we go through, this is what this is, what do we do about it? That's going to come through live, and I have no idea what it's going to be. I don't know what we're going to do about these things either, but what I'm going to do this afternoon is finish the Metatronics Today part of the workshop, which means we're going to pick up a bit where we left off yesterday, because there's a couple points that are very important with understanding the history of how we got here. Then we'll get into where is here that we've got to, what are we in the middle of right now? Because what we're in the middle of is quite amazing. I mean, I've had your graphs handed out. It's probably hard to read them because I had to do them in chicken scratch. Eventually they'll be typeset. But they're enough that when I hold the graphs up and show you the things that are taking place right now in relation to our planetary grids and relation to our universal grids, you'll begin to understand, hopefully, the magnitude of what we're in the middle of. Part of understanding that magnitude and of the reality of what's happening now, seeming real, is realizing the history that it has come out of. We have been, as we talked about before, progressively under an invasion on this planet. It began in full with the creation of the Leviathan races in the Atlantean period, where we talked about Thoth and how he was put in charge of a bioregenesis experiment and how he defected from the Emerald Covenant. Talked about Enoch defecting from the Emerald Covenant and taking the groups of his Leviathan races into negative agendas. Now, there's a significance of what's called the Atlantean king lines here, because there's something happening in the contemporary times. And if you follow, some people are aware of, some aren't, of some of the other contemporary New Age movements, people that are out there right now that are channeling so-and-so and so-and-so. There's a big movement about the awakening of the Atlantean masters, as if this were a good thing. This is not a good thing. This has to do with our shadow selves, first of all, that part of ourselves that has the Metatronic coding, which allows a part of our own reversed DNA template to be attached to by beings from the Wisedak matrix. What's happening with the awakening of the Atlantean masters are the people who ended up with with a certain level of Metatronic coding in Atlantis because of the fire sword initiations are now being put under full body possession, which means they're coming in to take over their bodies because they're coming here. We're looking for an invasion with spaceships coming in from other planets. That's not the way the invasion is taking place. It's not the way it was ever even planned to take place. What is happening right here and what we're in the middle of took place on a planet, what was a planet in density 2 called Procyon. And they literally wiped out the entire Ceres races that were there. They were a guardian Seraphi race. They literally wiped them out from within. just as they have progressively done here with transposition of race identity. It's transposition of cultural identity, transposition of radial body programming on a planetary level, and most significantly, transposition of DNA template through progressive hybridization. This is what has gotten us to the point where we are today. We're in the middle of watching a New Age movement. Some people pay attention to it and some people don't. But we are watching, and for the last 20 years, we have been watching progressively these Atlantean masters from the Wysadek Matrix and some of the competing ones from the Phantom Matrix that are fighting with them but are still, trying to get the planet and its people in the Phantom Matrix. We have been watching them go to sacred sites with these wonderful rituals. They do rattles and they do all sorts of ancient sacred ceremonies like we do, but they're different than the ones we do, because what they've been doing for the last 20 years is putting either the Metatronic codes or the Phantom Matrix reverse codes into the planetary grids at the sacred sites that they knew were sacred because they were sacred since Atlantis. Now, we're in the end leg of the journey that really began in Atlantis. We are at the point where certain events are going to begin to be more and more obvious to us. At the end of this workshop, Ma'a is going to explain more about what that might look like. And before we do that, we're going to go through a bit more of what has taken place, how we got where we are, because there is still a beloved but dangerous level of innocence, even among the people who consider themselves interested in the Azurite work. The magnitude of what we're involved in still hasn't sunk in for a lot of people. This isn't a couple of negative groups got involved and did some things with their holy books. This has been across the board since Atlantis. Every bit of spiritual teachings have been tampered with, have been taken and used as control dogmas to mind control us to get us to this point in history. There are still people among us that like to look into other things and say, oh, maybe I'll try this meditation from that group. Maybe these are a good group. It's very sad to recognize, but it's important if you want to be able to hold your integrity in this period, that at this point in time, all of the texts have a little bit of sacred left, because originally they were all part of the 12 sets of teachings that were from the Admiral Covenant, that were the CDD plate teachings that were given to the 12 tribes. All of the holy teachings on this planet were originally from the CDD plates, and they were translations, and each one, there were 12 different languages that they were done in. Each one of the tribes was a guardian of one of those sacred teachings. Pieces of each of those have been taken and muddled up with a bunch of other nonsense to get us to use sound tones, to get us to use prayers, which are commands in sound and scale our wave, to get us to begin to give our power away, to externalize God's. And it will help us a lot right now. I mean, we have no attachment. The Iani, the founders races, we don't have an attachment to whether or not you choose to follow the teachings that we bring through. We will bring these teachings through whether 1 million people listen or whether nobody listens, because it's the fulfillment of a promise that we would bring back the original planetary memory banks. That's what speakers do. The three of us have been speakers before. I have been, as has Ben, and so has Mac. We have been speakers before, and sometimes being a speaker has nothing to do with writing books and has nothing to do with even speaking to another human being. A speaker is a being who runs the frequency into the planetary grids through the DNA and puts the original cellular memory back into the planet that was here to begin with, runs the divine blueprint. Now, in this time frame, it's a little easier than it has been in others. We actually have almost enough time to write books, almost enough time to get it translated into a written form. There were times when it was not allowed in a written form because it would immediately fall into the hands of the Leviathan forces and the fallen ETs that guided them, fallen angelics, and they would take the knowledge and abuse it in ways to advance their own cause. At this point in time, the reason we're allowed to put it in writing, to speak it to anybody and everybody, is because it's too late to worry about that. They've already got it. They've been able to accrue pieces of the sacred teachings of grid mechanics, the Templar quest things, the sacred sciences. They know enough of it by now that even if they get some of the things that are coming in on security clearance now, it's not going to make a difference in the outcome. So it's kind of like you get to a certain point where, well, ideally things go a certain way and you don't have to reveal all of this material. You keep it under protection for, so it doesn't get further abused. But if you get to a certain point where it's going to turn into a mess anyway, then you just give the teachings wherever, whenever, because whoever can grasp as much of them as possible will be the people who might be left standing. And I'm not into fear-based stuff. And I told the Guardians a while back, this is part of my growing up, that if you ever get into talking about pole shift and that kind of stuff, I quit. I'm not going to be a doom and gloom person. I'm not into that stuff, because you have a lot of channels out there, doing all that kind of thing. And they said, well, we're about the, furthest away from doom and gloom as you can get. We'll show you what's taking place and what needs to be done to prevent doom and gloom. That's what their stance has been all along. This has been hard for me to get to the point where, we're on Plan B, and I've had to deal with that and have to continue, and my choice of whether I would continue to speak about it or just go, oh no, I'll deal with it personally. But to have to teach people about this, it isn't fun. Plan A was a great plan. It was come in, get the D12 frequency activated back here, get the planetary grids up to a high enough resonance where all these nasty technologies that have been put in here since Atlantis couldn't activate. If we were successful in doing that in time, Plan B wouldn't have happened. We would not have had the potential issues involving pole shift. We would not have had a lot of things that are going to happen. The problem is we were not able to get the planetary grids up to speed fast enough. It was a long shot anyway. Plan A was a long shot. Plan B was always the contingency plan. They didn't tell me about Plan B because they figured when I was in my first 10 years of waking up, I probably would have said, forget it, I'm not going to teach any of it. I'll write books, and then after I'm dead, people can read them. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. It's easier. If they have an issue with it, they have an issue with the book, but you're gone, and you don't have to deal with people throwing stuff at you. Ever since we began to speak, even when we weren't talking about the scary stuff, or we weren't being the cosmic whistleblowers on the ones who were running con jobs, the negativity that was thrown in my direction sometimes was absolutely awful. It was meant to intimidate me. It was meant to make me shut up. But there was a point where it almost did. And then I got mad. I said, I don't care. I have no attachment. Let them hate me. But if any one of them in the audience will listen, I'm going to keep talking. That's why I'm here. And that's why Az is here. And that's why Mac is here. We all have that same... oh, heck. So they might not like us. We're not here to win a popularity contest. We're here to tell the truth, whether anybody wants to hear it or not. So we're going to just quickly, but with enough looking at, I wish I had this chart large, but this is probably a month's worth of work just to get this on something readable and large enough to read. This was the product of probably about 6 months' worth of translation off the CDD plates of different pieces of data, because it didn't come through the chart. These charts don't come through. I have to design the charts after the data comes through in words. I have to take those words and put them in pictures so they make sense, so you can see things. And this is why they take so long sometimes. If they just showed me a picture and I could close my eyes and copy it, it would be much, much easier. Doesn't work that way. So the information on here is a summarization of all the information for about 6 months that have been given with huge context around it as far as the different Leviathan races and how they have progressively moved into the dominating force on this planet. They are the ones that control the politics here. They are the ones that control religion here. They are, and they have been since 9558 BC. So we are facing a situation, the magnitude of which is mind-blowing when you're coming from the mind control program. It just seems so outrageous and so impossible. The closest you can get is watching the Sci-Fi Channel, where you see these wacky things happening. Creeps from black hole come and try to invade the world, kind of thing. You can translate it into science, or you can translate it into spirituality. You can call them fallen angelics coming from the pit, this was foretold in the Bible. What was left of the Bible even kept that content. They said there would be the beast that came out of the pit. They said all sorts of things. Now, we've had other workshops where we talked about the seven seals, and we've talked about the horsemen, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and what those really are. So there is a truth to parts of the Bible, and there's also a great deception in how that truth has been presented, because it's been presented in riddles and rhymes, where beasts are things that we imagine to be big green things with 7 heads and 10 horns and a crown on each of the 10 horns that rise up out of the ocean, out of the pit. We don't think in terms of sci-fi technologies that have the ability to move planetary systems. We don't think of black holes. We have this romanticized fairy tale that we've been given to cloak the reality of what's taken place. And so many people have dedicated their lives for so many centuries now to uphold those fairy tales. They don't know how to let go. The fairy tale started in Atlantis, and they started with the creation of the Leviathan races that we talked about yesterday. I went through the process, the progression of from 155,000 BC, how the 5 different stages of the bioregenesis program for the Leviathan, for the Anunnaki races had been done here, and how progressively each stage had been rated by different ones that were not of the Emerald Covenant. What that created by the time we were in mid-Atlantis, let's say about 63,000 BC, which is around the time that the angelic human Atlantean root race was seeded. First came cloister races. That's where the word cloister comes from. The cloister races were the ones that had, they were the indigos. They were the ones that had the higher strand coding. They were the Lyran Syrians and the Gaian Orifeme humans. They came first, the cloister races, and from the cloister races came what was called the Turanicium II race, which was another version of the 12-strand angelic human race. This is where Atlanteans and Lemurians and those guys fit in. They were, if you take the indigos, then the smaller gene code from them that came out was the angelic human 12-strand. From those came smaller breakdowns of the strand content. Lemurians, Atlanteans, those kind of things. They had the potential, all of them, for 12-strand, but they would have a certain amount activated at birth. So we had our races on planet. They were the ones appointed here. They were the guardians of this place. But once the Leviathan races began to be genetically interwoven with our race, all hell broke loose, quite literally. And we are living the tail end of that firestorm that began in Atlantis. You hear little romantic versions of, yeah, there was this advanced civilization called Atlantis, but they abused the crystalline technologies, and we think, oh, maybe they blew up a few things with some big crystals. What they have done with the sacred crystalline technologies is absolutely, there are no words to describe the level of perversion of what's been done here. They've genetically raped a race. They have raped the grids of a planet, and not just a planet. They have progressively, as I showed you in the cube matrix structure, where they have literally taken the Stargate system here and the Stargate system in Phantom and plugged it into another Stargate. These are the potentialities of crystalline-based technology, by the way. I mean, it was brilliant. What was done here was absolutely evil, but absolutely brilliant. Now, ultimately, good does prevail. That's the way Source set it up here. However, there is a huge scale of allowance. It's like a pendulum that swings. When it goes to a certain level of perversion of the original plan, it will begin to swing back. We are in that point now where it has the cycles of evolution through this time matrix have swung. The cosmic cycle has gone to its extreme of negative, where if it went any further, it would take down the entire structure of this time matrix. And the time matrix was built in a way that that wasn't going to be allowed. So it will rebalance itself with bringing in the D12 frequency, with bringing in the divine blueprint. What that means is we're in prime time for the final conflict drama. That is what is taking place right now. And most of the people on the planet are walking around clueless. They haven't an idea that this is going on. People follow the New Age movement, have no clue what they pick up when they go into a room, for example. They don't realize they're getting astral field implantation that's going to activate more of the reverse matrix codings just by going to a workshop. One of the worst places I've ever seen is the New York City Expo. We went there, and I was appalled the first time. I just went to sit in on somebody's workshop. You know, it was, oh my, it was their free lecture. 100 people in the audience. And because I had the high sight on, and I wasn't trying. I was trying to turn it off, in fact. And if it wasn't for the beloveds kind of sitting over my shoulder going, no, you're not going to leave. Sit there. We need you to hold frequency. Right? I wanted to get up and run because what I saw were these forms coming into the room, and people are oblivious. They don't see them, but the guy running the workshop knew they were coming in, and he's doing his thing, teaching people, and these things are coming in the room and astral cording all of the people in the room. And what they had, when I saw that, I wanted to literally get out my skin. I was like a porcupine with its spines out. Get me out of here. And Ma'a had said to me, no, we need you. You're all right. You're fine. stay and run frequency. And they had me run Maharic Seal, and they had me projected into the room. And it was amazing because I watched the chords start dropping. And it really, really aggravated both the speaker, who zeroed in on me at the back of the room. He could feel where it was coming from. But the stuff that's going on is amazing right now. And people don't know. People that go to churches think this is a good thing. If they knew what the churches were built to do, they would have a different feeling about churches. Once upon a time, there were holy temples, and even if there were no buildings standing, the holy temples were the people who carried the living presence of God with them, consciously and fully. We were the living temples. Whether or not we had a building to put our bodies in didn't matter. This planet was once a living temple. It's been a temple that's been run dry, and it's going to rebel quite soon, because it will rebalance itself too. If it's kind of like part of the planetary immune system. If a disease or a virus gets too strong, it will eventually kick up the immune system. This planet won't let itself be fully destroyed. So anyway, I'm going to take us back really quick to Atlantis, to after the Leviathan races were created. All right, they were created over a period of numerous generations that began in 155,000 BC and then moved up to 63,000 BC, where at the last phase, or the giving of the fifth angelic human strand into the Leviathan pattern, was done. This created the Anu Melchizedek race. The Anu Melchizedek race had, it was the first one that actually looked similar to the angelic human races, because they looked more ape-like. Some of them looked more combination of ape and reptilian-like. They didn't look like humans because they weren't humans, and they came out of the Neanderthal pattern. So they were like strange versions of that. But as they progressively picked up more, after generations and generations, more of the angelic human DNA strand, they started to look more like human beings. Now, angelic humans in those days were very tall. They were, some of them were, really on planet about 6 to 9 feet tall was about the average in those periods, because there was already genetic mutation that was keeping the height down. But this is the point where we began a downward spiral of evolution that we're living the end of today. Now, there were several primary groups of beings, fallen angelics, that invaded. You have, basically, we talked about the Anu Elohim, that from the original fall, they were Anu Elohim. They appointed themselves as the false creator gods. They created the Anunnaki lineage. And you had the fallen Seraphim races that were the Draconians, and then some of the Odedicron races that were reptilian got mixed in with them. The Seraphi also create bird people. All right, the original Christos Founders races created different types of forms. The Anu Elohim, before they were Anu Elohim, had created the aquatic ape hominid type form. And the Elohai Elohim, the ones of the Emerald Order, were hominid felines. They had the large feline-like eyes. They were the Lyran. That was the original Lyran Founders pattern, and actually all of the others came out of that pattern. So it was feline. There's some people that call them the Leonines, which were kind of like a downstepped later evolution of them. But when we look at the little forms running around here on the planet, we have bugs, we have mammals, we have all sorts of things. They all came from one of these primary 3 Creator God collectives, one of the 3 Christos Founders races. So when we're dealing with the Leviathan fallen ones, we basically have 2 places that they all came out of, aside from the Wesedex. They were a completely different matrix. They were actually, you know how we have our Eka maps that takes us all the way up to the first level of creation in our matrix? Well, there's a parallel to that, where we have that whole system of our Akasha Ea. There is a parallel Akasha Ea that's linked to us that we didn't even bother trying to expand the graph that big, because once we get through our own, we're home and in full expansion. The Wesedex are coming. They're infiltrating this one from the parallel of literally the cosmic cluster. They call the Akasha Ea the Ruche cluster, that it's a cluster of universes or reality fields, and that's the pattern that all reality fields that have manifestation will take. So aside from the Wesedex, there were primarily 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, primarily 9 different invader races. All of those 9 invader races came out of either the Anu Elohim and their Anunnaki lineage, or the Seraphi Seraphim fallen ones and their Draconian dragon moth lineage. So they were, if you took them home to their creator gods, it would be the dragon moths and the Anu Elohim aquatic ape things. Now, the Anu Elohim created, when they created the Anunnaki, the first Anunnaki form was a bipedal dolphin. They're called the bipedal dolphin people. And that was, they're the Jehovian Anunnaki. They consider themselves the supreme Anunnaki, and the other ones that mix with the Seraphim are considered, lesser than them, and they don't tend to not like each other. But they're working together right now with the United Resistance. But anyway, in Atlantis, you had these different branches of the fallen ones. You had one group, and it's important here because there's some words. We find out where the Adam races came from. What's the story about Adam and Eve and all that stuff? Well, we start to understand when we start to see the names and who came out of what once the Leviathan raids were orchestrated here. Now, when we get into the Anunnaki races, we primarily have the Nibiruan Anunnaki, the Palladian Anunnaki, and those two groups work together a lot. They're also in other systems, but they're the primary strongholds. These are called the Luciferian Anunnaki, and there's a reason for the term Luciferian. First of all, they're not Jehovian. All right, the Jehovian are the bipedal dolphin people, pure strain Anunnaki. These are the ones that are combined with the Seraphim, fallen Draconian, or some of the reptilian or Dedicron races to form a hybrid strain. Now you have the Enki, Enlil, and Marduk groups were the primary ones of the Anu Seraphim Anunnaki races. There was one group of the Enki, they're called the Enki-Zephelium races, that combined with another group of the Marduk-Satan family races. This is where we get the word Satan from. It's referring to one of the draconian hybrids of the Anu Seraphim. They combined with one of the more reptilian hybrid Anu Seraphim, the Enki groups. So you take a Toth Enki-Zephelium and you combined it with a Marduk. Another name for this group is the Marduk Draman. It's not the Draman, the Dragon Queen ones. You combine in the Satan family of those. You combine that, you get a Luciferian. The Luciferian imprint was used to upgrade. They considered it upgrading the Nibiruan and the Palladian Anunnaki races. So you have the Palladian Nibiruan Anunnaki, who are the Luciferians. The Toth groups fit into this. Toth is one of the shining stars of the... yes, he almost made it to Christendom again, Christum. But so there's that group. They have three primary raider races that became involved with the Leviathans here. One of them, the ones from the Palladian system, from Alcyone, which is Tara, which is Earth's counterpart in density 2, are called the Samjaze Luciferian Anunnaki. Okay, they are also the Palladians. They're the blondes, the pretty blondes. There's some dark-haired ones, but they're ones they like to put on display and contact people and things. They're the angelic blonde ones. They're very Nordic looking. They have very pretty features because they stole them from the Procyonies. The image that they wear is something they got genetically when they invaded and genetically took over the Ceres Procyon race, who were blondes, but they were angelic human type blondes. So you have the Samjazi Luciferians. You have the Toth Enki-Zephelium groups, which are the Nibiruan Anunnaki. That's the Nibiruan royal elite there. They're the ones that really tried to take over Rome from the Dracs. You can see 8-pointed stars everywhere in the ancient Roman stuff at certain periods. The 8-pointed star is the sign of Nibiru. It's also the sign of the fixed phase-locked Merkaba, and a lot of other things that have to do with the base 8 system and the Wisadek agreements. Now, you have another group called the Marduk Luciferian Anunnaki, and they were a draconian group of the Anu Seraphim hybrid Anunnaki. These are affiliated with the Alpha Centauri. So this is where you get the Alpha and Omega Centauri people coming into it. Then you also have the Jehovian Anunnaki, who don't like these guys. All right, Jehovian Anunnaki, these are the pure strain. They created the Anunnaki raider race in order to destroy the Oraphim races that were created once the Wisadek agreements had been made and they broke through to this matrix, through the Phantom Matrix. The Oraphim were created after the Azarites fell. And once that occurred, in response to the Oraphim Guardians being created, the Jehovian Anunnaki created the Anunnaki. They were the avengers of Anu. Their purpose was to destroy the human lineage, any of the human lineages, because their objective was to take over the time matrix. So all of the Anunnaki races came out of that and have at their core imprint. They genetically have that core intention. They were created with that core intention, and it's proved to be very hard for them to overcome. They also were programmed with the idea that they were superior, they were elite. They should be the ones running the time matrix because they're so much better than we are. There's an arrogance that goes with their pattern. That was what Thoth's downfall was. So the Anunnaki races came originally out of the Jehovian Anunnaki bipedal, having 2 feet. Actually, they were dolphins with feet and hand type things. They could go on land or they could go on water, and they were a density 2 and 3 race. So they were semi-etheric and etheric density. They downscaled them here and put them in our waters as certain types of dolphins, but not all of the dolphins are of them. Some of the dolphins are of the Brahmarama races, the cetacean races that were put here to counteract what their dolphins were doing. Now the Jehovian Anunnaki lineage, when they invaded the Leviathan races, created their Antichristos Grail line, just like the Anu Seraphim ones, the Pleiadian Nibiru ones did. You also have the Odedicron reptilian races that originally got caught in the fall without meaning to, but some of them very much digressed from that point. And you have the Omicron Draconian dragon moths. They all got involved. So you have this big line of Leviathan races being invaded and directed by each of their creator gods here to fulfill the agenda of their particular creator gods. The warring on this planet has been because everybody's been being used as little armies to fight these Phantom Matrix battles that are going on. For ages, the Anu Seraphim Anunnaki were fighting with the Jehovian Anunnaki, trying to annihilate each other, and both of them were fighting with the Draconians, and the Odedicron would side with whoever would not try to destroy them, because everybody was trying to get them out of the way. And what we've seen on this planet is a progressive nightmare that's been their nightmare that they brought here. Now, when we get into some of the names that are associated with these lines, there's a whole bunch of names. It'll take me forever to go through all of them. But they were basically, on this side of this graph, we show, like right over here, not totally over to the end over here, but over in this section. This is the Anu Seraphim Pleiadian Nibiruan crew. All right, when we go over here further, this lineage is the Jehovian Anunnaki crew. We go over here, it's Odedicron, and over here, the Omicron Draconian. Now, over on this end are those kind of misfits of the universe that are the Marduk line, which are the Draconian combined with the Anunnaki, and they tend to do their own thing, and they've had a lot of problems because they're a minority compared to the other races, but they still had their 2 cents in here. What these groups did was the Pleiadian Nibiruan Anunnaki created lines of Leviathan races by raiding the experiments, called the Elulkum, the Adiruans, the Lilithan, and the Azuriel. Now they later combined their groups to, these were called the Beli Kudman, by the way, those particular races of Earth, Leviathan, that were of the Nibiruan and Pleiadian descent, were called the Beli Kudman. Now, between 22,340 BC and 10,500 BC, those races were upgraded by combining them with other things, progressively raiding angelic human races to get more of their gene code. They became the Atalans, and they combined the Adiruans, the Lilithan, and the Azuriel. This is Thoth's group, Samjazi's group, and who are these guys over here? The Enlil group, which are a reptilian group, Nibiruan reptilian group. They were combined, their Leviathan races were combined to form the Atalan king line. And of the Atalan king line, there were the Atlas line, who came out of the Enlil Odedicron, the Osiris line, which was part Enki and part Samjazi, and the Larsa line, which was taking all of them and putting them all together. The Larsa kings were Atlantean king lines, the Atlantean Antichristos king lines, that were responsible for the progressive invasion and taking over the territories of Atlantis. Atlantis at one point was a large continent. There were certain things done, I believe that was way back, that was in, I think, was that 50,000 BC that they did that? I forget. It was at 25,000. There were 2 different periods in the Atlantean mess. That's on the other chart. But anyway, the first one took down most of the continent, leaving island nations. The island nations that were left are what we call England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales up in the north. That was Lohas Atlantis. Bermuda area, what we call the Bermuda Islands now, is the tiny remnants of what was a very large central area called Nohasa Atlantis. And this is where the Noah line comes from. When we get into Noah and Abraham and all these guys, Nohasa Atlantis is where it came from. The Noah line was the line of Leviathans that came up from that particular region, and I'll show in a minute where they fit. And then there was Brua Atlantis, which now is down in the Florida area, Sarasota, Florida, and coming down into where I think Cuba and those kind of things are down there, and up into the Bimini Islands. So these were these are the areas that were progressively where the raiding started, where the major raiding started. From there, they literally went through every corner of the planet. And the corners of the planet they were looking for were the corners of the planet where the 12 tribes lived. Because the 12 tribes, there are 12 stargates and 12 Q sites, which are the ones that connect to the inner Earth temples. Those are the most sacred sites on the planet because they're the control sites for the planetary grids. These were the sites that were targeted for invasion. We've looked at the chart of that before, where you can see where some of the interesting action that has taken place. I mean, it's still taking place down in the Middle East, and like in Iraq and Iran, they have the Gate 10 connection things. You can just look at the maps and see where the gates are and see how peoples have fought with each other and why. So we got to the Attilan king lines, and they formed the Osiris kings that came up, that eventually came down through Egypt as the invader races of Egypt. We had the Atlas king lines, and they almost faded away. Then they combined with the Osiris lines later and became the Horus lines. All right, so there's like all this combining of Leviathan races. These are just the Leviathan races, and they would raid different tribes of humans to pick up more of the human coding. The Larsa kings are interesting because there is physical evidence left, a few pieces they forgot to pick up, of the Larsa tablets that are the king lists. They have them, carved in stone, and interestingly, Enoch's name is listed on the Larsa king lists because there was a time in 10,500 BC in a thing called the Luciferian Conquest, where Enoch decided he would break the Emerald Covenant and join with the other Anunnaki races. If you can't beat them, join them, was basically the approach he took. Enoch didn't do it for the same reasons that Thoth did. Thoth had an arrogance problem, still does. Thoth did it for personal gain and for gain for his people, from an egotism, as opposed to Enoch doing it because he figured they had so much control at this point that if they didn't cooperate and they won, that his races would be destroyed completely by the Thoth groups because they didn't cooperate. So he had joined, and it was a bad decision, but he joined, and they led their people into taking what had originally been a bioregenesis program, hybridization program, to get them back into the Christos imprint, and they decided to create raider races that would progressively take over instead. Now, what came out of these guys? At the same time, you also have developing over on this side another set of interesting people that were in opposition to the Attilan king lines that were the Palladian Nibiruan primarily. You had the Jehovian Anunnaki, the pure strain Jehovian Anunnaki. Now, for a while, Enoch was the leader of those. This was before he turned. He was the one that was helping the Jehovian Anunnaki hybrids get back into the Emerald Covenant. But there was another group of Jehovian Anunnaki that were not Emerald Covenant at all. They were the Urantia, and they had a subrace called the Admians. All right, this is where we start to get the Ad beginnings to what becomes the Adami races. We had the Admians combined with the Nephites from the Leviathan race Nephi level of the experiment that we talked about. They progressively came up and became the Zadokim Hasim. All right, so now we're getting into something, the Hasim. From the Hasim, we ended up with Hassa kings, and we ended up with No Hasim, which were the ones that combined later with Enoch's group. The No Hasim combined with the Attilans to form something, a new hybrid, a super hybrid, that was intended to be the master hybrid that would take over the planet, was called the Adam Kadmon. Now, the original human race was from Tara, the original Turanicium 1 human race, had several different divisions. One of the human races was called the, I have to get it exactly right, it's the Adami Kudium. Adami Kudium. So they literally created their own Adami Kudium by raiding the races here, and they called it the Adam Kadmon. This is where the Metatronic pattern, this is where the path of Arimathea actually started. It started way back there in Atlantis. Progressively, now this stuff was taking place before the flood, all right, before the flood where all the records were taken away. By the time the flood occurred, and the flood occurred in 9558 BC, it was orchestrated. There was a big rally that took place in 10,500 called the Luciferian Conquest, and this is when the Enoch groups joined with the Thoth groups, and they created the Anunnaki legions, and they combined their races to begin forming the master race, to make that Adam Kadmon race that would take over this planet. And they together chose to get rid of everything else they didn't want on the planet at the time. Now, they couldn't get rid of humans completely because humans had the keys to the stargates. And if they didn't run those keys in a stellar activation cycle, what would happen to the planet is the stargates would not open and the planet would go into pole shift. That's a protection device that was put here. If humans weren't here, humans and indigos weren't here to run the security codes through the DNA, that meant there was something wrong because humans are supposed to be here as the guardians. And if the guardians weren't here and the gate keys weren't put in, the place would simply roll and the gates would shut, so nothing could come in and take it over. So they had to keep us here, but they had to make us stupid so we wouldn't be able to fight, head on to stop them from what they were doing, because technically humans and indigos can run 1,000,000 times more frequency power than any of these guys can if their DNA is functioning properly. So the Luciferian Covenant was the agreement that Enoch entered and his groups entered. This is where you had a strain of the Jehovian Anunnaki, the Nohasim that were under Enoch's control, joining with the Pleiadian Nibiruan Anunnaki races to form a master raider race. You also had a bunch of the Jehovian Anunnaki Leviathans and their creator gods that didn't want to do that. So they created an opposing line. They became the Hassa kings. The Hassa kings moved later, after the flood, moved into Assyria and Akkadia. There was another branch of them that combined with the Odedicron reptilians, and another branch that combined with the Omicron draconians, where you ended up with something called the Teozin, the Lathian, and the Etruan king lines, Atlantean Antichristos king lines. From them, you ended up with the Hassad king lines, the Hellenium king lines. Notice some of these words. They're words in our history. They're words in our history that human beings have been conned into thinking apply to them, but they don't apply to most of the people on the planet. Because, interestingly, even though the invasion here and the infiltration has been huge, there are still more humans and indigos combined than there are Leviathans. That's one little secret they don't want anybody to know. That's their weak point. Okay. These lines came up. So you have this Draconian line. These are the Dragon Kings, the ones that combined with the Omicron Draconians, the Hassad Kings. This is a lot of the stuff you see going on in the Middle East that later got into the Ahala Kings and those kind of things, where you have, these are the seeds of the Islamic religion. When you move it over, the seeds of what they call the Jewish religion, which had nothing to do with the Jewish people at all. The original Jewish texts were taken and they were twisted like everything else. The Jehovian Anunnaki were running that section for a while. If you trace it up, it takes you into some of the familiar names. Where are they? Somewhere up here. They have the different breakdowns of the Pharisees and Sadducees and these guys that we hear about, in the Bible and in biblical history. These were the lineages that were in control at that point. They were in control, governing religion and governing politics. These were not human races. The whole Exodus thing that happened, it wasn't Jewish people that were running. It was the Hyksos. And I'll talk about the Hyksos in a minute because we're having a problem with the Hyksos on the planet right now. The Adam Kadmon race, that was a combination of the Enochian and Thothian Leviathan races into a master hybrid race, progressively went about raiding other races. They raided the Celtic and the Druidic 12-tribe Magi races, so they took on some of their coding. They're literally on this paper, it gives you a list of the basic small, this is the major invasions, all right? There are millions of smaller ones progressively that took place. By the time we get up to the flood, this is going to be the beginning of clean slate. All right, they orchestrated the flood by messing with the crystals. The whole Noah story, Noah and the ark, has to do with Enoch. Enoch taking a group of his people from Nohasa. They knew because Enoch had joined the Luciferian Covenant. They knew that the Samjazi and the Tothenki Anunnaki groups were going to create a deluge. They were going to get rid of the people in Atlantis that they didn't want there. So they were going to take their own off planet temporarily so they could get rid of the rest. But Enoch had a particular cluster of his special chosen ones, and because Enoch had forewarning, he didn't warn the rest of them. He only warned the ones that were already beginning to be genetically combined with the Metatronic program through intertwining with the Tothian races. He took them, and he took them from Atlantis by boat to Egypt, to Giza, where the Ark of the Covenant portal exists. He had pass keys to the Ark of the Covenant portal because once upon a time he had been a guardian. And he took those people into Giza through the portals, into the Ark of the Covenant. That was Noah's Ark. It wasn't a boat. There were certain beings that were taken, certain people and some animals and those kind of things that they knew they would need to reseed when they came back up after the deluge. The Ark was the portal passage called the Ark of the Covenant that all of us came in on. Everybody had to come through that to get here on the planet, since seeding free. So these are the stories. This is the truth behind the stories, that pieces of them remained. So the Noah line was the line that came up. It later became the Abraham line. It's the line that came up from this period where Toth and Enoch agreed to follow the Luciferian agenda. And the Luciferian agenda involved the Metatronic Wisadek coding, because in 22,340 BC is when, this is way before this stuff, that's when Toth decided to lead his peoples into the Metatronic immortal body as opposed to the natural eternal ascension body. When Enoch combined his races with that, they took on the Metatronic coding. So both of them. This is why you'll find teachings of both the Tothian schools, also many of the Egyptian schools, like the Isis schools, all those guys. Isis is another word from Samjaze. All right? I mean, these are the races. When we look and we go, oh, isn't that neat? You know, Isis and Horus and the Egyptian thing. We've been so naive because the history records were taken away from us. It's not so fun and enjoyable when you start to see it. And that's sad because it's like, oh, shoot, our romantic bubbles get burst. At this point, it may be a rude awakening, but if we don't wake up, we can go off and be the little subservient things played with by these false creator gods from now until eternity in a black hole matrix, if that's what we prefer. You know, that choice will be honored. Source is not going to stop you from making the choice. But the truth is recorded in the records, and that's why the truth is being brought, so you can make a conscious choice. Because without this, you're being conned. Without this information, you might, people might hate the messenger, and that's just too bad. You know, I don't take it personally. It's what I stand for, what we stand for, that people have an issue with. But if there's enough love to sit in front of groups of people who might hate us to death for the things we speak because it's crashing their old models of what they thought was real, do you know how much love it takes to do that? It'd be a lot easier to just say, well, fine, you don't want to hear me, I won't talk to you. We don't do that. Now, when we come up, these are the beginnings. Now, the Christ story, of course, fits in here. But first, after the flood, 9558B flood, you had all of these races. It was already planned and positioned which groups were going to invade, which ones would go in which direction. We had... and, of course, you had the Draconian Dragon Kings having their own plan of raiding. You had the Jehovian Kings, which were the Jehovian Anunnaki that didn't like the hybrid ones, with their own plan. And you had the Master Race Toth Enoch crew that had their own plans. There's a whole history where they came up through, through the Celtic Druidics. Literally every race line, angelic human race line on the planet, was at a different time systematically infiltrated. And the creeds were forced on them. You know, you either, we're going to control you now, you either buy this and you teach your children this and you do this, or you're dead. Pick one. You know, I mean, that was on a good day. On a bad day, they just come in, kill all the males, take a few females for breeders, and rape them until they conceived, and then force them to bear the children. So they would have, and they used to do this in sacred sex rites, usually under moonlight. They took, there's certain things about conceiving under moonlight. They're actually better for high resonance fetal patterns than during the daytime. They knew these things because of the Atlantean texts that had taught all about sacred sexuality and those kind of things. They used all the teachings against the human race, and they progressively picked up our race lines, our codes, which meant they progressively got more access to the planetary grids. They were picking up each time they created a generation that had another piece of the human DNA in it. They had another piece of the keys to the Planetary Templar, because it was the human DNA and the indigo DNA that carried the keys, and still does. Now, we come up through the invasions of Sumer, the Sumerian invasions. All of that was about their history. What we have in our Sumerian, take Sumerian history, all of that stuff was about the Leviathan races. There is not one shred of human history from 9558 BC up to the present. There's not one shred of what was human history. It's E.T. History 101 that we have been reading and being taught ever since the flood. And this was orchestrated, and it was on purpose. It wasn't done by accident. Nothing slipped through, hardly. Little pieces here and there, like the Larsa King tablets that listed a few things and took it back so many generations that, wait a minute, how many generations back was that? There was like hundreds of kings listed on the Larsa King's tablets, and Enoch was in there, so it extended the history context of Sumeria back further than they'd originally assumed. There's a lot of other relics that eventually will come to the surface that that verify this, if we ever get to find them, if things don't get so weird here that archaeology becomes kind of a moot point. It just kind of surfaces itself because everything rearranges itself. Of the Israel territory, the Palestinian territory, what we call Jordan now, all those areas. The Hebrew people were the Grail line for one of our tribes. The Hyksos invaded them. And what we see as Hebrew history right now, the tribe names and all of that, they are not the Hebrew tribe names. The Hebrew had their transposition of race identity done. What you're seeing there is Hyksos. Part of it Hyksos, and part of it the Jehovian branch that came through that didn't want the Hyksos infiltrating. This is why you'll even have different sects within, say, like, the Hebrew religion, or even like the Muslim religion. Everybody's fighting with each other because there were all these different agendas and want to take one pattern hybrid and combine it with another. Anyway, I want to, okay, still I'm going. Yeah, I'm doing all right. Now, I just want to get show where this history is, because it's significant. It really, for me anyway, it drove the point home. Well, once we get through the Egypt invasions, and they were, over quite a long period of time, 9558 BC, up through about 5,900, but they continued after that. Every dynasty, every pharaonic dynasty was one of theirs. It was one of the Leviathan king lines that happened to fight its way into position over another competing group. All through this period, the big challenge for the angelic human and the indigo lines was to keep their lineage alive genetically on planet, because they would be exterminated whenever they'd be found out. So oftentimes they would do their best to blend in, the ones who actually knew who they were, where they still had memory of who their lines were. And they would try to pretend to, if you're in Rome, do as the Romans do, just so the Romans don't find out you're not of them, because then they'll kill you, that kind of thing. So we also were scattered. We became scattered all over the place because we couldn't just sit on our gate sites anymore, because they had been infiltrated and invaded. There'd be little clusters left at the gate sites, but the majority of them that we're trying to preserve so the gene line could continue up until this time would literally be scattered in small clusters all over the place and mixed in with everything, so we wouldn't be found. So it would be much more difficult to identify us, so you couldn't go raid the village knowing you were going to get a whole treasure worth of DNA coding from the angelic humans. So, who did the Egypt invasions? From the Egypt invasions, went into the Mayan invasions, went into India, in India it was 5,900 BC. This was there is a little bit of the text left, the Mahabharata texts, told about the air wars that took place in that period, where there were spaceships coming in and there were some fighting in the skies, because certain groups tried to take over, and the other Leviathans didn't like it, and the Guardian races got involved because they were going to exterminate. Everything was going to get exterminated. So there was a skirmish, let's say, in 5,900 BC, and there's still record of that in the Indian or the Hindu texts. We get in 3,650 BC, the Mayan raid started to take place, which was Thoth's crew going over into, and remember, going over isn't hard, A, if you have a spaceship, or B, if you know how to work the surface portals, which are the ones that connect Earth points to Earth points, as opposed to like inner Earth or other places. And some of the portal systems were operational. So they could get from one place to another. I mean, you see these charts of, oh yes, humanity started here, possibly in Africa, and then moved up this way, and you see the little arrows of how they say, by finding the archaeological evidence, like, oh, we found bodies here and bodies here, so that means they must have done this. They have no clue. I mean, when you just take them all up in the air and put them on spaceships and things like that, it makes it much more complicated than simply trying to find the archaeological trail as to what races existed. It's even harder to find it when you have a bunch of Leviathan races and fallen angelic races, or ETs, whatever you want to call them, coming in and manipulating the paper trail behind them. They didn't want things found. They got rid of most of, and there wasn't too many of them to begin with, the bodies of the cloister races. They had elongated heads, and they were very tall. There's been a few they missed, and they were found, I think they were found in Peru or something, weren't they? Or South America somewhere, I think. But they have to say that these were beings that suffered from encephalitis, I think they said, swelling of the brain that made their heads grow bigger. Yeah, swelling of the brain, all right. That's what happens when you have larger brains. There has been a progressive sweep. And right now, we're in the middle, still in the middle of this. Science is hugely controlled on this planet. What the common people are allowed, even in America, where the land of the free and the home of the brave. Yeah, land of the free, that's a joke. It's no better than any other place in that sense, other than we get to play around in our hologram and think we're free more than most people do. It doesn't change the fact that we're in a prison camp. This planet has been a prison camp since Atlantis, and we have a chance to evolve out of that now. And this is what the three paths of Genesis are about. When we come up through Egypt, through India, through the Mayan raids, takes us up into where they start moving into. This is where we get into the Abraham lines, about 2075 BC. 2075 BC is when the person known as Abraham came into being. And Abraham was out of the Adam Kadmon Hyksos line. And he was combined with some other lines. See, they were trying to get together as many of these diversified Antichristos Grail lines to create a super race. So they were doing their best to combine lines. Abraham marked another upgrade where they combined Hyksos, which were also called the Midianites. The Hyksos are also called the Midianites. They combined them with another branch of somebody or other coming down from the Jehovian lines, the Nohasa lines. So it was taking originally one of the group of Jehovian Anunnaki Leviathan that wouldn't join the Enoch crew. These guys came in then. And progressively, this led up to the dramas that we think we know something about. It led up to first of all, between 1670 BC and 1550 BC, the Hyksos invaded Egypt completely, and they took over. They were the ruling party there. And then they wonder why they got in trouble. They came and took over some of the other draconian Leviathan races that were running there. And then with a vengeance, they came back, and the Hyksos had to do their exodus. They were kicked out of Egypt because they had come in, taken over, which at the time in Egypt, the draconian Leviathan races had, their pharaonic rule had taken hold. These guys came in, the Hyksos came in, the master race, they took over them, then they got taken over in return. Through this thing, you have the Moses story that evolves. Moses was one of the Hyksos. In fact, he was, the whole Moses story is meant to cover up the fact that he was the son of one of the pharaohs that he was supposed to be on the opposite side of. This was during the Tutmosis period. All right, the Exodus took place during the Tutmosis 1 and 2, I think. I have that someplace. It's in the records. So, I mean, the whole thing with Solomon's Temple was all of these things, all of these pieces of history fit into this line. When it came up into like 700 and it was actually about 800 BC time period, this is where you had the Roman invasions and the Greek invasions, where you had various groups. First the Draconian Leviathan came in, and literally the Remus and Romulus story in the Roman things that supposedly were the beginnings of the Roman Empire, they were the Draconian races. They were, Remus, I believe, was the Odedicron reptilian, and Romulus was the Omicron dragon moth. All right, so you had the Draconian reptilian presence starting in here. These are the guys that became the Knights of Knossos and the Knights Malta and that kind of thing. And they had come up from, earlier on the Etruans and the Lathians and those guys, like further back in Atlantis. When we came up to about another level, a bunch of other stuff went down. But when we, let's see, there's one place I want to go from Rome. Oh, it was about 23 BC when we started to see, 23, 24 BC, we started to see the Roman invasion by the Hyksos and the Anunnaki Leviathan races, where they were going to come over and do they were doing the Olympian god stuff and all of that kind of thing. Now, there was one version of the Omicron Dracs that were beginning the Olympian paradigm, because that particular group had made alliances with the Weesadeks. So there were both Draconian and Anunnaki races that made alliances with the Weesadeks, and this was the Metatronic coding. So we have a history of the most bizarre, slow, talk about a painful, slow death. It's like if you're going to wipe out a race, just drop a bomb on it and let it go. This has been torture. We have lived torture, and most of us sit here and haven't a clue, and we still call the names of the gods that they gave to us that weren't the gods that we started out with. And it's really, really sad. That's where I can find enough healthy anger. I don't care who listens to me or who doesn't. If one person in a group of 1 million gets it and can get free from this before they end up metatronically coded for eternity, it's worth it. So, anyway, comes up to the Christ period in Voyagers Volume 2, even before we began to play Whistleblower, when the United Resistance was formed and they declared war on us before the Palladian-Syrian agreements were broken, the 1992 agreements were broken. The story was very gently done without letting any of the history about the Anunnaki, because the Anunnaki were trying to make agreement. They supposedly were going to enter the Emerald Covenant. We had to be very, very careful about how much history we were allowed, the Guardians were allowed to release while those agreements were holding, because part of their things, their demands, were we don't tell right away. Of course, we'd have to tell later, but let them get used to us first before they realize what we did here, because then they'll really hate our guts, right? That was basically what was happening. In September of 2000, when the Anunnaki broke the Palladian-Syrian agreements, they joined the United Resistance, and the whole group of them literally made an edict of war against the founders. And that's when it was time to get the history out and let people know what's going on. So, in the Voyagers book, it talks about the Christ period and the two Christs. Actually, the three sort of Christs. There were the original Christ, which was Jeshua 12. He was called Jeshua 12. And at some point, they'll reveal the last name of the family line. His mother's last name was Constantine, but that was not the father's last name. And I know that because I was his half-sister, and we had the same mother. So in that time period, my name was Miriam. That was the Constantine line that came up, since that period. There was another attempt to bring certain groups of the Hyksos over into the Emerald Covenant. You had a group called Galactic Federation of certain of the Anu Seraphim Anunnaki and the Jehovian Anunnaki, who decided they'd enter the Emerald Covenant. And they were doing this for a reason. They were doing it primarily because they knew it was getting closer. All right, this is like 2,000 years ago. It's getting closer to when everybody knew the stargates were to open again, which was during this time period. And they knew that without bioregenesis assistance, their races were definitely going into the Weesadek matrix. There was still, they had about 2/3 of the Weesadek coding. There was still 1/3 left. There was enough left that they could have been brought back to at least be able to stay in Phantom, to where they could bioregenesis out from there after quite a long course of evolution. There were certain ones that had, of the Toth crew, that had originally decided to do the Metatronics, then decided they didn't want to do the Metatronics anymore. They didn't want to become Weesadeks anymore, because they were finding out that the Weesadeks were actually quite bullies. And they'd give you menial positions like middle management, but you'd never make it to the top. That kind of thing. So there was some rebellion taking place within the Toth group, and Enoch just kept getting himself and his people all tangled up in messes, and it was just really poor judgment. I have a soft spot for Enoch, even though he's made some horrible decisions, because at least, there's still a twist of arrogance that tends to go with anything that incarnates through the Anunnaki or the fallen Anu Elohim pattern. He picked that up. He was an ascendant master that came through that pattern to get down here. He picked a bit of that up toward his people, the chosen ones. In other words, you guys aren't worthy, but you guys are. This is an elitist standpoint. The chosen one issue has always been about elitism, and it's always been chosen by who is the first question. So anyway, when we got to the Christ period, there was an attempt at, again, and this had really started before. It had started in the Solomon period, and Solomon had been a part of the beginnings of this, and then it fell apart again, and we tried it again with, during the Christ period, where taking certain ones of the Hyksos, and they were the master raider races at this point. They had the most powerful DNA, compared to a human on the planet. they were brought into the Emerald Covenant, and they were to go. It was an allowance of, after they would undergo certain rites that would assist them using codes to clear the DNA to some degree, they would then intermarry with Magi, Grail line Magi, to be able to begin a generation that would rapidly be able to get the coding back up before this time period. So this is where the Essenes came from. The Essenes were a group of, they were a subfamily of the Melchizedeks, which were one of the cloister angelic human races. So Essenes were naturally one of those families. The indigos that got involved with this experiment, which were the Jeshua 12 line, were of the Melchizedek Essene lineage, in the angelic human indigo lineage. They were to combine from Solomon, started with Solomon and Bathsheba, I believe she was one of ours, and created the Solomon line. Now, Jeshua 12 came out of the Solomon line. He was the real Jeshua. He was the real Jesus. He was the one that went around teaching ascension. He did not teach hierarchical ascension. He did not have disciples under him or below him. He taught as a group. He taught with a group of Magi that went around together to bring back the teachings of the Emerald Covenant. And we did a pretty good job. We got a lot of them. We were putting them in writing at that point. They were put in several different writings. They were put in Egyptian. They were put in Hebrew. They were put in the Hindu languages, Sanskrit languages, and they were put in Chinese and a couple other dialects. So they would be pieces, at least, would survive. Because we knew as soon as they hit the papyrus, they would, somebody grab a hold of them and they would change, or either be destroyed or completely rewritten. But in the Christ period, this is where the Arimathea agenda, which had started way back in Atlantis, the Arimathea agenda was the Metatronic agenda. This is where it became woven into the biblical story. We caused them a lot of problems by bringing Jeshua 12 in. There was a whole bunch of people learning again about the ancient history. We were teaching about Atlantis. We were teaching about the stellar activation cycle that was due in this period of time and how we were all preparing for that. We caused a real problem for the for the Pharisees and the Sadducees and a bunch of others, the Romans. A lot of people were very upset with us. Okay, still doing right. There was a very big need to cover up what took place in the Christ period. Now, we were doing all right until what we call a period called the Essene Divide, and that's an event that's listed on this paper as it basically, it was a few years before and quite a few years after, but the kind of high point of it was 23 A.D. Now, Jeshua was born, we call him Jeshua 12, because he was carrying the 12 strand pattern stuff. He was born in 12 B.C., and he finally ascended through the Ark of the Covenant in 27 A.D. That's because the mission got blown. The mission wasn't supposed to get blown. Now, in the agreements that were made, there was another, let's call him junior avatar, that was allowed to come in on the bioregenesis experiment. He was named Jeshua, and it was spelled with a Y, the way the Hyksos, not Hebrews, but the Hyksos alphabet didn't have the J in it. The original Hebrew alphabet did, for anybody that knows, that little twist on the names. Jeshua 9, Jeshua, this was the line where you get Mary and Joseph, all right? The mother and father of that one were Mary and Joseph. Johias and Judy were the parents of Jeshua 12, the real Jesus. Now, neither of these guys got crucified. They were actually working as a team. Jeshua 12 ordinated Jeshua 9 into the Melchizedek cloister priesthood. John the Baptist had ordinated Jesus, Jeshua 12, into the priesthood. These were the Magi, and we were attempting to create a new hybrid Grail line that had the potential to bring back the full Christos pattern to those races. And because the Hyksos races had invaded everything they could get their hands on since Atlantis, they had the most coding of everything. So that race was chosen for that opportunity because they could connect genetically to just about everything. They also had a huge amount of the coding that went with the planetary grids. Well, everything was going fine, and Enoch at this point had actually come back into the Emerald Covenant and decided he wanted to be a part of it. Thoth was doing one of these as usual, where Galactic Federation had kind of convinced the Thoth Pleiadian Anunnaki crew to do it, to enter the Emerald Covenant. Except they had an agenda. They weren't planning on staying. They were planning on making sure this avatar of theirs was born, and then taking that further into the future on their own agenda. And that's precisely what they did. They created, once Jeshua 9, we call him Jeshua 9, was born, there's progressive infiltration of the Pleiadian Nibiran Anunnaki via Galactic Federation. Galactic Federation, the one that likes to channel books these days, were back there then. In fact, they're the ones that helped to take out Solomon's temple by accident. Yeah, they blew up their own temple by accident. Won't even get into that now. But anyway, in the Arimathea agenda, which the Anunnaki groups and the Hyksos, Leviathan races had given lip service to giving up. They wanted to be healed from that. You know, they came up from Atlantis. Once Jeshua 9 was born, the showdown began. Galactic Federation pulled out of the Emerald Covenant, and so did the Thoth group. And now they had their super hybrid Hyksos that had the coding of the Magi, the genetic coding of the Magi. So it was, again, another notch up as far as getting security codes to the planetary stargates and creating a master raider race. But what they had to do was cover up anything that had to do with the real Jeshua, because if they didn't, there would be too much knowledge that would be written. I mean, when we would get books down, you give them 6 months on those days, and they'd be something different. So there was like several copies of things handwritten, and one would be the real one, and you'd hide that somewhere special. And then you'd have ones that had certain alterations put in them that would, if you read them right, lead you to where the real one might be. Right? All sorts of games being played back then by both sides just to keep, you know, the truth on the planet, and the other guy's trying to get rid of it. So the Arimathea agenda got interwoven into what we call the Bible, even before the Council of Nicaea finalized what the Bible would become. Even in like 100 BC, we had the Hyksos Arimathea agenda coming up. You'll find this, the Hyksos writings in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran Dead Sea Scrolls. These were a group of the Hyksos races that were associated with the Essenes. Yes, the ones they had raided and gotten part of the gene code from, because Essenes were around for, you know, as long as the root races and the cloister races were around, because Essene is simply one of the smaller families of the Melchizedek cloister angelic human race. All right. So when you see the Dead Sea Scrolls stuff, this is coming from the Hyksos perspective. All of these things were building up. So by the time the Christ drama unfolded and the betrayal took place in 23 AD, we couldn't finish the mission that we had started here for, which was to bring the races back into wholeness, into oneness, to prepare everybody for the stellar activation cycle of this time period, so everybody would be able to make it through, and Earth would be reborn into a new, you know, a new age of light, and everybody would be welcome there as long as they behaved and stopped trying to hurt other people. In the Essene Divide, we called it the Essene Divide, because you had some of the ones with the Essene coding that had come up from the Hyksos that had raided Essene races, and they're the ones that had been combined with the, you know, the true Essenes, the Grail lines. You had a divide between them that took place, and this is where our contemporary understanding of the nonsense that comes up from that time period in the Bible references and things, where the true Grail line, Jeshua ascended. I mean, he just left through the Ark of the Covenant. He didn't die. He wasn't crucified. He wasn't even persecuted. It was the other guy that had the big mouth. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but, you know, being told he's holier than thou by his fallen Anu Elohim friends, and that it was his job to convert everybody over to the thing, he got a little too outspoken, let's say. And he did indeed. Like we had groups of 12 knights, let's say, like the round table knights around us. Well, he decided to do disciples, which was, I'm above you and you're going to listen to me, kind of stuff. Jeshua 9 reflected very much the mentality of those who were guiding him and directing him. He was an incarnate out of one of the fallen Anu Elohim collectives. He was an avatar, a 9th level avatar, a D9 avatar, oversoul, that came in order to do this. And he was supposed to stay on the side of the Emerald Covenant. But when he didn't, there was this whole new path of evolution that was going to be run, and it was going to be run through the biblical story. So they took pieces of the ancient Hyksos distortions, the stuff from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and even back way further into the Hebrew traditions that went back into Atlantis, and they began to weave tales, and they began to edit things out that anybody else wrote down that didn't fit into those tales. So the Arimathea, or Metatronic agenda, began being woven progressively into what has become Christianity on this planet, which was interesting because, all right, now what happened to Jeshua 9? He didn't get crucified either. There was another guy that, because Jeshua 9 went around and really agitated the Romans and a few other people and got too much attention drawn to himself, they had to get him out of the Holy Land. They had to literally get him and his family out because they were going to kill him if they stuck around, and they couldn't let that happen. He had that new gene code. Can't let him get killed. He has to have more babies. This is really how the Anu Elohim were perceiving the whole thing. So there was a guy named Arahabi who looked like him physically, who resembled him physically. And the Anu Elohim sent him on a few little tangents of inspired visions and things and convinced him that he was Christ, and got him spouting some of the teachings so he would sound enough like him. And they set Arahabi up. And they told him he couldn't ascend. He didn't have a gene code where he could ascend, but they told him that they would give him the gene code, the Metatronic version, that he could ascend if he would allow himself to die for his God. He was crucified. So there was a man crucified, but it wasn't either of the Jeshuas. It was Arahabi, who was a poor sucker. He was conned by having visions given to him by a bunch of fallen angelics who told him if he let himself be tortured this way, that God would reward him with an eternal body. Well, it wasn't eternal. It might have been immortal, but it wasn't eternal. All right. So there is some reality to the crucifixion story. It was part of the cover-up of the real Christian story, which has always been about bringing the inner Christos teachings here. That's what Jeshua taught. That's what the other Jeshua was supposed to teach, and he started to. Now, where Jeshua 9 went, he had Jeshua 12, literally in 27 AD, ascending back up the Ark of the Covenant. He left. John the Baptist went in his own direction. He got killed. And Miriam stuck around for a while and ascended, maybe, I think, what was it, 20, what did I do? I forget, 37 AD? Something like that. I think it was 37, yeah. It's about 10 years after Jeshua. And we did what we could, but what we were there for couldn't be finished. And it was all kind of left till next round. And this goes up, like, next round, like, took us in through the Arthur legends and all of that stuff, King Arthur and all that. That was all about this. But the important thing to see here was Arimathea is tracking it. There was, and Ma'a is telling me this now, who this person was, because I was trying to find out who exactly it was, and Ma'a is verifying something, that a person named Joseph of Arimathea was the brother of, get this please, would you please catch this? The brother of the person who was Mary, Mother Mary, okay, the brother of Mother Mary's mother. Okay, that's how I just worded it. What does that make him? The brother of Mother Mary's mother.
Brother of Mother Mary's mother.
So it's Mary's uncle.
Yeah.
Mary's uncle? Yeah, that would be Mary's uncle. Okay. Now, he was of, I believe the history has him in Palestine, of Arimathea. In fact, there was a place called Arimathea in Palestine. And I wonder who settled that place. It was Hyksos. And there was an exodus of the Hyksos Grail line, the Jeshua 9 line. They got Mary out. Mary Magdalene is who he had married. They got Mary Magdalene out. Now, there's a little twist I got to share with this. Mary Magdalene was intended to be the wife of Jeshua 12. It was his twin flame. And they messed with her before she woke up, and they married her off to Jeshua 9 in order to get the gene code. And that was part of the reason Jeshua left, because there was nothing left for him to do. He left children behind, though. He didn't marry any of the mothers. It was done through sacred rites within the temple, and certain women were chosen. There were 6 women chosen. And there were fathers who would be the fathers of these children, to raise these children as their own. And it was simply that it was a very sacred leaving behind of a gene code before he ascended. So there were 6 lineages from Jeshua 12, the indigo lines, that came up from that period. But what happened to the other guys, the J9 lines, who'd hijacked Mary, and this is causing Sananda a problem right now, because Mary got Metatronic coding, his twin. So right now, Sananda's main mission is to work with Galactic Federation to try to get, and Sananda was the soul name of Jeshua 12. He has to get Mary, his twin, the other half of his entity, out of the Metatronic coding. So he's a bit busy in this particular time frame. That's why you'll find both Jeshua 9 and, reluctantly, Jeshua 12 working with the Galactic Federation people, with the Anunnaki people right now, because he has a karmic issue to settle, where he has to help his twin flame, to his twin avatar, to get out of the Metatronic coding before she goes down. Because if she goes down, he's stuck in this, this matrix with the other half of him coded over there. So there's some issues that came up out of that period. It was awful what happened in that period. It was the Essene Divide period. And what's come out of that has been even more awful. Because what they did was Joseph of Arimathea, of Palestine, Mary's uncle, got the bunch of them out. Now, he had a lot of trafficking because he was involved with, I think it was gold, wasn't it? With the gold mines? Yeah, he was like the Ministry of Mines of Rome.
Tin and Cornwall as well.
Tin and Cornwall? Okay. Because he had connections to England and also to France, because they went to France first. Joseph of Arimathea got them into France. And there was a group, they had, that talk about getting sucker punched. There was a group of Cathars. The Cathars of France were portions of what became the Cathars of France, were some of the Jeshua 12 lineage people that had been, moved around. We didn't just leave them all in the Holy Land. We had to put them at different areas. They were put at Gate 12, which is Montségur in France. That's where the original Cathars started. Well, before we had full-blown Cathars, we had gene lines being filtered up into this direction. Okay, we had our Grail lines there. We had our Gate 12 Grail lines there from the beginning. They were always there because Gate 12 is Montségur, France. So we would have Tribe 12 people there. The Tribe 12 Grail lines would be there, and so would the root races be there. Well, the Arimathea, Joseph of Arimathea, brought the Hyksos, Jesus, into the 12 tribes regions of France, and at first was able to pass him off as the other Jeshua. Because, people weren't in, active, open communication with each other. So he was taken in, and they created a following there. This is where you had, before the Cathars even became officially called Cathars, you had the Cathar Divide. There was part of the Essene Divide. You had a group in a Grail line, an Antichristos Hyksos Grail line, that came up, living in the same spaces as the Grail lines that went with Tribe 12. Now, later, Jeshua 12's descendants, one of them, came and was brought in to bring up the Tribe 12 lineage again, because it had been contaminated by the Hyksos, the Hyksos Jeshua. So, out of France, you have two movements building. You have the Cathars, and Cathar was just like Cathara, healing. It was originally spelled with a K. It referred to Ka-tha-ra, light, sound, one. That's what the word meant. It got changed into Cathari with a C, and this had to do with not just the Hyksos, but also the Dracs getting in on the act. You also had, during this period, the beginnings of what became Draconian Christianity, as opposed to Anunnaki Christianity. So you had the Bible stories, the stories coming up from this chaos that came out of the two Jeshuas and the lineage moving into France. It moved from France and then spread into England and into other places. It seeded the Templar quest and the Arimathea agenda. It was seeded through Joseph of Arimathea and through Jeshua 9 and Mary and Joseph, who were the parents of Jeshua 9. This was a betrayal of the Emerald Covenant. The people who were representing the Christos teachings kind of got knocked in the head again, but the drama continued. But this is what became of this was very interesting, because by 325 AD, a couple hundred years after all this was taking place, the Draconians got in on the picture. The Hyksos were making so much advancement by putting out their records, by combining it with the records from the past and putting the Jeshua 9 story out as if it were the real story, and hiding and destroying any records that were existing on Jeshua 12 and, the true Miriam and, John the Baptist. They changed names. They took certain stories that took place here and they changed the order of this person was first and that person was second, as far as, birth times. For instance, they put John the Baptist as almost in a similar, time frame, age bracket as Jeshua, and he wasn't. He was much, much older. So they doctored the documents, the historical documents, got rid of what didn't serve them. They were doing really, really well, and that really, really upset the Draconian mob over in Rome. So the Draconian mob over in Rome decided to take all of this new information, this new Christ period stuff, and make their own version of it. And they combined it with the Olympian god stuff that they had taken from the Anunnaki originally. They had taken over some of that. They were using that to control the Roman people, the Roman empires. They combined it, and what used to be the Olympian gods became saints instead. So they renamed them. They made them saints, okay? You couldn't have Olympian gods anymore. You could have saints. They decided this was a good bandwagon to jump on. And the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD brought together Pharisees, Sadducees, people from, people in control of large groups where they had to deal with this problem about what do we do with the records? We might not like each other, but we all have one common interest to make sure we win when the stellar activation cycle comes. So there was a book assimilated and created out of editing, twisting, and taking most of the guts out of the historical records. They use some of our records, they use some of the falsified records, these are the parts that will be compatible with the Qumran stuff, the Dead Sea Scroll stuff. And they created what we call the Bible. And as we know, the history from there has been absolute chaos, where the Draconian, now what's interesting too, is you had the Draconian versions, the Draconian Leviathan races, which were became the Knights Gnosis, the Knights Malta. They became the push behind Catholicism. Then you had the Hyksos lines that became the push behind Protestantism. This is where you have the division between Catholic and Protestant. It's Dragon Anunnaki, as usual. It's like humans just never fit into this history here. We're watching wars go on between people who don't even belong here in the first place, and the people who do belong here think they're a part of it, and they don't know how to step outside of it because their own history is gone. So that leads us up to the point where we are here. Yeah, we're doing good. Okay, that's good. Now, good. I'll leave him 10 minutes and me about 8. Okay, that was actually good. So I think that's enough of the history so you can understand how the things that we're talking about now, there is a context for these. It's not some idea we pulled off the top of our head and we're trying to con you into believing. There's a history here. It's not a pleasant history. It's a history that makes you want to cry. At least it does me. It's been horrible. It's been horrible for the Grail lines. It's been horrible for the angelic humans. And it's been horrible for any of the Leviathan races who tried to escape from it. Because the fallen angelic collectives that control them and who can mess with them because of the DNA weaknesses, they have more of the reversals in their DNA, especially the ones with the Metatronic coding. They can be, put that little CD in their heads, and you can show them pictures, you can give them divine experiences that aren't real. This is how we've been manipulated all through this process. Now, what it leads us to is the beast. In 22,340 BC, when Thoth's group agreed to join the Wysidex, this was a thing called the Luciferian. Remember, Thoth was one of the Luciferian groups. This was the Lucifer Archangel Michael alliance. Okay, now they had been against each other for quite a while. Thoth didn't want, the Wysidex coding. For a long time he'd stood against that when he was Emerald. When he went over, this was the alliance between Lucifer, Thoth, and his whole collective. It wasn't just one person, it was the whole collective, and the Wysidex. Now the Wysidex had interbred, when they had broken through here 570 million years ago, they created a race in the Andromeda system of Phantom Matrix called the Necromaton. The Necromaton later raided seeding 2 of the angelic humans, creating something called the Nephilim. All right, they were an Anunnaki, a mutated Anunnaki Wysidex thing. When Archangel Michael, these became the Archangel Michael collective. They were the Mikalub. They were called the Mikilup. And they were also called the sons of Baal, B-A-A-L. And in some doctrines that came up, Baal was another word for the devil. Everybody was calling everybody the devil. I mean, whoever, if you didn't like him, you called that one the devil. You had Satan, you had Lucifer, you had Baal, you had Set in Egypt. I mean, you had a bunch of them, and it all depended on who was writing the book that would say, which one was the bad one or which one was the good one. The Protestant movement that has come up through the Freemasons, for instance, that's the Hyksos line, came up through the Freemasons. That is actually the controlling faction behind Protestant religion. But most of the Protestant figureheads on the outside have no clue about that. They actually hold at the center of their creed a worship of Lucifer, which means they're Thothean. Right? Yeah, I mean, the others have at their core, the Catholic ones, they actually have at their core a connection to Satan, which is the Marduk-Draman line of Anunnaki Omicron, that this is where the Satan stuff comes from. So it's a riot. It's almost like at the core of each of the religions, the one they're saying the one that is evil is actually the one they're supporting. It's like the one that's motivating the whole thing. It's been such a very confusing game. But anyway, it leads us to the present moment where we have technologies, sci-fi technologies that aren't fiction, that have been progressively put in place here, and we've been progressively mutated so we wouldn't know how to handle it or even believe it was there by the time the stellar activation cycle came. We have what are called there are several different layers of technology that if we could have got the grids up high enough in speed, we wouldn't have had to worry about this one. This one was the worst case scenario. Like, oh dear. The Guardians have been doing everything that they could. I mean, even negotiating with these bozos. Because they're bozos. I mean, oh yeah, we'll give you lip service for 24 hours. They will turn around and stab you in the back. This has been the history of dealing with the Anunnaki races, particularly on Earth. But even that was worth a try. Because if the 1992 Pleiadian-Sirian agreements had worked, where they were Emerald Covenant agreements, where the Thoth groups and the Enoch groups had decided they would come in and stand against the Draconian groups in order to not let the Draconian groups get control. If they had held, we wouldn't have had to worry about activation of the beast. The beast is a mechanism that the scope of the intelligence it takes to create something like this is awesome, because it's something that moves not just planets, it moves solar systems. It has the capacity to take this solar system and our whole chain of gates going from here to D11. That takes us up through up into the Lyris system. Literally take the whole thing down into a black hole matrix. Which means its matter would fry, first of all. Everything totally gets disintegrated going through a black hole. Then it reforms in disorganized fashion on the other side. It would reform on the other side, neatly tucked in to the base 8 reverse Metatronic coding. Now, if we look at this crazy diagram, this will get easier when I typeset it because there's little tiny words all over. It was hard enough to understand when I showed it to you where the 3 axes were coming through, where we showed. Could you hold? Yeah. Thank you, Lovey. Okay. Where we had up here the Wysadek axis, right? There's like a Cathara grid running at this angle, right? Then we had over here the Phantom axis running down this way, and then our main axis, right? Now what's been added to this diagram is, first of all, showing you something that was put in 25,500 BC, when the Palladian, Nibiru, and Anunnaki groups put in something called the Nibiru Dadic crystal grid. That was the thing that was anchored at Stonehenge and then plugged into 24 prime crystal temple bases all over the planet. This is part of what we're clearing in our site work that we're doing here. The Nibiru used to be a planet that orbited within our galactic plane. It was our 12th planet for a while. Now, when they started to build the beast, Nibiru became our 11th planet first, because our 11th planet, which was Chiron, was broken in half. Part of it was made Pluto's moon, and the other part of it was stuck where it pops up in between Saturn and Uranus, and then it pops back down into Phantom. Now it's almost like balances, weights, trying to get the balance, the electromagnetic balance just right. In order to do this stuff, you have to have the absolutely perfect electromagnetic balances of energy, of push and pull, etc., on a galactic and higher than galactic level. So Nibiru used to orbit this way. They changed that orbit. First, they knocked it in when they got rid of Gate 11 planet Charon and broke it into two. They then pushed, using frequency, using their gates, they pushed Nibiru into the 11 position. They left a hole where the 11 planet had been. There was a hole in that orbital field, and they plugged Nibiru into that hole. From there, they created a link where they took Nibiru, and this wasn't all done at once, but in 25,500 BC, they did this final piece. Once Nibiru had moved from the 12 spot to the 11 spot, 25,500 BC, they dragged it in to this orbital, okay, to the phantom orbital, with another large planetary or half a planetary mass. It used to be a planet called Maldak, which was our fifth planet. That was destroyed in seeding 2, as was Charon. Now, Maldak, there's a piece of Maldak that was large enough to counterbalance Nibiru, where it had about the same planetary mass. So they were able to set up, using this gate alignment, the phantom races were able to set up an orbit of Nibiru to make it like a patrol station, where on one end of the orbit you'd have the planet Nibiru, and on the other end you'd have the piece of Maldak that they turned into a battle star that came to be known as Wormwood, which was a mistranslation of what meant Doom World. Because it was always known that Doom World, when that battle star, Nibiru and battle star, came in, it would have the potential to pull our matrix into phantom matrix. That was before the whole Wysadek mess, before we had to deal with the whole Wysadek mess. And what they did, they took advantage of the phantom technology. Now, this was the phantom races at first, deciding they were going to do this. The Pleiadian Nibirans were part of this. They weren't, remember, Thoth broke the Emerald Covenant in 22,340 BC. This thing was put in 25,500 BC. So that was before that. There's not the Wysadek agreement yet. They still have their matrix coming in here. But right now the phantom races are trying to pull our matrix in to create enough critical mass in their matrix so the Wysadeks can't pull them in because they're fighting them. So originally Nibiru would do this. It would this is the axis that the new Nibiru in orbit would create. It would begin here, and it would cycle up this way. It would cross over through their Phantom Gate 8, which would be Phantom Alnitak Orion. It would circle back down, and it's still, where you see the dotted line? That dotted line is its phantom passage, all right? It's not passing through our system yet. This is the phantom level of our system, where it's not touching us yet. It would come back down this side. Then when it did a full pass through the phantom system, it would do a loop-de-loop down here, and then come back up this way, and it would pass through our system this way, going straight out. Now, we have our sun here, Earth over here. The positioning it would come in would be here. It wouldn't come close enough to cause major cataclysmic mess on Earth. It would create a bit of ripples, and sometimes you get a slight pole shift, but it wasn't the huge cataclysmic scale. And it would pass back out. Now, when one was out, the other would be in. Every 3,657.8 years, one of them would come in. And when it was Nibiru coming in, Wormwood was out. And when Wormwood would come in, Nibiru was out. Right now, we're approaching a period where Nibiru's out, but Wormwood's on its way in. And this was part of what the biblical teachings had taught a lot more about, but there was little bits of it left in the Nicene translations that tell, in Revelations, that tell us about these things. Now, the beast comes in here, where the Wysadeks decided they could take advantage of this. Now, this was originally a small beast that was intended to pull us in to prevent the Wysadeks from pulling the phantom matrix in. They figured out how to use it to get both. They made their link, their 666 link, through their Stargate 6, our Stargate 6, and the Phantom Stargate 6, and they anchored it into our sixth, the Stargate in our sixth planetary core. Our sixth planet is Jupiter, because 5 was Maldak, and Maldak's the asteroid belt now, because it was blown, the rest of it was blown to smithereens, and the big part of it was used as the battle star for Nibiru. They created this frequency bridge here that anchors the 666 through Jupiter. And what this will allow through Jupiter, there are frequencies that are transmitted that when Nibiru begins, or either Nibiru or the battle star, but this time it's going to be the battle star in this cycle, when it comes up and hits the level of orbit, it comes up like from down here. This is actually Orion down here. It's like where our Stargate 1 is. This is Trapezium Orion and Orion's sword. Then it moves toward us through Stargate 2 domain, which is Epsilon in Eridanus, and it progressively moves toward our system. It comes up under and comes through in the asteroid belt. So this is where it enters our galactic plane, is through the asteroid belt. When this happens, this beast, the frequencies here activate. These are the blue sword, the flaming blue sword of Archangel Michael frequencies. They beam a frequency through the Jupiter orbit template, and it reverses the path that either Nibiru or Wormwood in this case would take. So it should be coming up, doing this and going past us, where it comes up here, hits that frequency, reverses, comes back here, cuts between Earth and the Sun, circles back around, makes a second pass on the other side of Earth, and then comes out this way across our whole galactic plane, and then up and out, linking the whole thing into this orbital plane and literally pulling the whole thing down and under. In more practical terms, more easy to understand terms, what this means is a planetary body at least twice the size of Earth passing between Earth and the Sun. That is a problem. Now, this is set in motion through activation of the turnstiles. We talk about the turnstile grids. They were part of the Atlantean mess that was put in when Thoth agreed to turn part of the Nibiru and Datic crystal grid that had belonged to them in the Phantom Matrix, turn part of that over to the Wesedex. Right now, they're running those frequencies. Now, the beast wasn't due to raise its nasty head until 2011. That was originally, if the stellar activation cycle progressed the way it was intended to, and 2012 was supposed to be the opening of the full Halls of Amente stargates, our stargates here. Wasn't supposed to happen until 2011 when they activated the beast. There are already groups on planet that are being conned into creating manual physical technologies that are needed to help anchor these frequencies. There's a group of ETs pretending they're the nice ETs. They call themselves the Cordium. They've been working with the Wingmakers group in New Mexico, and they've been getting this labyrinth group of humans, they call themselves the Labyrinth group, to help them build certain technologies, because they keep telling them there's this big bad invader race that's going to come in, and the only way to protect the planet is by building these devices. They're the invader race. I mean, talk about conning somebody. The people that are working with the Ringmakers Labyrinth Project, they're humans like us that think they're doing the right thing, and they're being taught to build the technologies that they need to do the final anchoring on planet. HARP is a part of this, the HARP installations, and there are several others. The Star Wars program was part of that also, but that kind of got nixed, and there's going to be certain things put in probably with that. We'll probably see some advancement of the need for some type of Star Wars type technology. The space station stuff has all been part of this, because a bunch of the Illuminati head guys running around on planet know we've been under invasion. They've known it since the 1930s. And they know that there is cataclysmic stuff potentially coming. They knew that because the other guys, the fallen angelics, are planning on activating this. Our guys are trying to stop it, to get to the point where this would not activate. We were doing well, so well, that they activated it early. Yeah, okay, I'll stop. Now, what this means to us is part of what we're going to find out from obviously something has to be done here, because what it looks like, now normally Wormwood would not be coming in if it was on its normal orbital. It wasn't due to begin breaking through into the Orion system, where it come up from Phantom into the Orion system. In 2008, it was supposed to begin, and then it would take 14 years to even get into our system. Activation of the turnstile grids, which are certain types of crystalline implants, they're in Earth, they're in the Sun, and they're in various other places. Activation of these accelerates the whole process. It activates the Jupiter mess, the 666, which begins to literally pull the Wormwood up faster than it normally would come. this is the part where I'm going to have to go into just translating for Ma'a, because they haven't told me what this means. And it just bugged me because I wanted to know. If you're going to scare me to death, tell me first. So I'm going to let Ma'a explain some of this. More of this is going to be talked about tomorrow on Paxos. There's something special they want us to do there. Okay. Anyway. All right. All right. He says we would like greetings. First of all, he's saying greetings to all of you, and it has been a long time. You know me, and I know you, and one day we will remember together. But for now, there are pressing moments at hand. We are not here to frighten you. We are here to prepare you. This is preparation that would have ideally occurred in the next several years, but this time frame is no longer available. Okay? To slow him down, it goes really fast and I have to pace it. There's a saying that you use in your cultures. I believe it's called "in a nutshell." In regard to this, for the present moment, and there will be more, we will be joining you in your excursion to Paxos, one of the few places that we presently hold the primary grids. This is why we waited to take you on your journey until we go there. He's talking about the voyage, the meditation voyage. In a nutshell, you have a very large asteroid headed your way. Your planet does. Your governments, though they know not what they're seeing, have since the early 1980s been aware that in the Orion system there is what appears to be Planet X. There have already been books written by others, not of our lineage, that have labeled Planet X as Nibiru. What's interesting is what they're seeing in the Orion system right now is indeed Nibiru, but is not Nibiru that is coming in. Nibiru flashes on temporarily as it makes a small loop up at the top in the diagram that you were shown. Up in here, it flashes on temporarily where it becomes perceivable in the Orion system. Where the action is truly happening is what's happening down here on the other end, down in this space where Wormwood is coming up, because Nibiru will flash off and cycle out into the phantom orbit while the Wormwood comes in and begins to cycle in. And this will come in. It will almost look as if the Planet X they found jumps from an area that is in the region of Orion's belt into the region of Orion's sword. But what they actually will be perceiving are two separate bodies. They don't understand this yet because who they're talking to have not told them. There are persons in your government, governments worldwide, that have been planning for temporary evac, wherever off planet they can get themselves, and they've made many deals in order to do this. Now, we would be irresponsible guardians if we would sit back and watch the beast come awake and wipe away within hours everything you have worked so hard to achieve. We won't allow this to occur. There's a window of opportunity that the guardians have where they can destroy this asteroid called Wormwood before it reaches your galactic plane. It is very, very dangerous to do this. It involves frequency. It involves beaming it with frequency. But because it is linked now to Jupiter through the beast, there is a chance that it could create orbital chaos within the solar system that you are presently residing. If it is successful, the beast will find itself put back to sleep. And there will be some changes, planetary changes, but they will not be as severe as if it goes in the other direction. Now, there is a very small window of time that exists for us. That window exists between February of 2003 and the end of August 2003. If we are able to dismantle and reduce to smaller pieces this object that is coming your way, it will be a time for celebration. There will still be your final conflict drama, because the others will not give up. They're not going to give up. They have nothing to gain by giving up. But things will be much more simple if we do not have to worry about the ricochet around the sun that they are planning to have happen. If we are not successful, even if we are successful, and there is what is called, you could compare it to a feedback wave. This is our concern. It is not whether we can or not destroy the asteroid as it moves towards you. It is what will that do in terms of feedback wave through Jupiter's open gates, because the gates of Jupiter are opened and linked into the 666, the 6 stargates. This could cause some degree of chaos, but it would be less chaos than would occur if Wormwood were allowed to come in and literally take the yoke out of this time matrix and drag it down into phantom. It isn't a choice. There really is no choice other than to do our best. The Guardians will do their best to reduce this potential threat to your safety on your planet, to reduce it to small pieces. You will expect asteroid showers. We are watching the situation closely. Nothing will be done before February of 2003. And it may not be right until the end, when the best opportunity comes. We watch what you could compare to sine waves and how they move through your galactic clusters. We need to watch these for the appropriate window that will create the least feedback wave. With the least feedback wave, there is a chance of reducing this to asteroids, many of which will not even crest your system, because they will be taken out into other systems, caught in the orbits of other things on their way through, particularly into Eridanus. There may be some interesting action between Orion and Eridanus that your scientists may be able to observe, but you'll probably not hear about it unless you participate in some of those secret underground astronomer clubs that have been keeping eyes on things that the governments don't allow to be published. Now, we do not want to frighten you nor scare you to death. You are not alone in this, and we want this to be known. But perhaps you can understand now why we are trying our best, and at times our best is frustrating. We don't have pretty books to give you. We don't have all of the hoopla that can be so much fun to take spiritual development workshops. We give you the data you need to build the type of Merkaba that you will need to come through our gates if this goes not well. Because if this goes not well, there is an outcome that will be perceived here. The last time such an outcome was known was in your timeline of 208,216 BC. It is not a joke, but it is not something to allow depression or fear or hopelessness. The worst thing that can be done is hopelessness. Oh, the world's coming to an end, I'll go max out my credit card. What if things go well? Then you're going to be in trouble. Plan for the best, not the worst. And part of the best will be that your societies and their structures, though they are quite pathetic in certain ways, enough of them will survive in certain ways that basic functions will still be normal in there. So you still may be accountable, yes, for whatever debts you feel you may have incurred in your hologram. It is not time to go have millennium end time parties. But it is time to get your bodies ready. Your bodies need to be able to run what is called the ruche. The ruche, if you refer to your echo maps that we gave you before, is that little shape here. It's also the shape, the core of the Akasha symbol that is worn in the crosses. The Rushe are the first 12 pillars of pre-sound and pre-light that literally all of the God worlds, the first core God worlds, are structured upon. It is the most powerful frequency available. What needs to be done right now on this planet has to do with, first of all, preventing the beast from taking this system down. Part of that involves getting rid of Battlestar Wormwood. The other part involves stabilizing the system. Now, there's a series of maps you are given. Let's start with, let that one go. Need to find this one. Where'd that other one go? It's the one that looks like the center one.
It's under here.
Is it? That's the one. This one. Now this should be vaguely familiar from the dance floor class. This is your Veka map. Remember, just your Vekas. You have your Veka, your Eka, your Akasha A, and your Akasha AL levels, yes? This is just your Veka levels, which is your time matrix in its parallel. Now, you are in the bottom grid. All right, this one here is your densities, your dimension 1 through 12, Kathara grid. This is down here in density 1 that your system exists within. This is the natural axis, the vertical. That is natural for your system. Right now, this is the axis that is phantom, and this is the axis that is Wisadek. Okay. These were given yesterday morning, yesterday's workshop, by the way, so if anybody doesn't have them, these ones. Now, what is happening with this beast, it is intending to drag this axis into this axis, and this went along with it. These two are spinning clockwise. The natural spin for this matrix, for our matrix, is counterclockwise, if we follow what we talked about in the natural flow of energy in the Veka structure. What needs to be done to stabilize this system, even after, let's say, the core of the beast, which is the wormwood, is taken away? That will create chaotic energies in the system. It needs your system, not just your planet. And this is good, because if it was just your planet would experience some interesting major Earth changes. But because it's not just your planet, it's your sun, and it's also the other densities, there's a coherence that can be maintained. Now what needs to be done is this axis of your 4 densities in your system, in your 12 dimensions of your 15-dimensional matrix, need to shift ahead into what would be the future. Now you're spinning this way. Kathara grids are spinning. These matrices are spinning. About 2,000 years from now, this axis would normally be aligned over here. This area here, which will show you where it fits on the larger maps in a minute, your axis here, in order to avert being pulled in this way through the destabilization that will result whether or not wormwood comes through, needs to be pulled in and anchored at this axis. From where you are, right now, 2/3 of your planetary Merkaba are at the phantom axis. In order for this, what is called the Bridge Zone Project, to be fulfilled, first those 2/3 need to be brought back into their natural axis. Then the natural planetary axis, galactic axis, needs to be brought forward 45 degrees. Cumulatively, that is a 67.5 degree Merkaba axis shift on a galactic and almost full universal level, 12-dimensional level. Now, if this was just your planet, we would be already, you would not be here, you would be evac already, because it would create literal, probably several rounds of a 360-degree shift. Roll. But because this is taking place from D11.5 in the matrix all the way down, this means the Lyra system is going to go through this all the way down. It's going to go from Lyra to Andromeda to Orion to Arcturus, all the way down through Sirius, down to the Pleiades, down to here. back to Orion. There is the ability to hold some degree of stability. Earth changes are going to happen on this planet. We will not lie to you. We will not tell you that before, until it was certain. We told you somewhat before. The degree, let us say, if we use the American color system, we use our own color system. If white is no threat at all of earth change, if pink is mild, if blue is equivalent to red alert, and if black is get out now, we are moving very rapidly from intense pink to pale blue. We're going into red alert because the planetary grids are beginning to respond to the D13 frequency that's being run through them. There will be some volcanic activity. You're starting to see this already. You got a little gift from Gaia in being able to experience, just to bring home, drive home the point. These things do happen, sometimes even to you. You weren't harmed in the earthquake of Crete. But there will be more of these type of things. And in the middle of it, you are going to watch the world be led into world war. It won't be all at once. It'll be pieces here and there. There will be times, there are something that we will talk about very quickly now, and we'll elaborate on in other things. Land entrustments. Everyone that's angelic human, everyone that's indigo, and many Leviathan races that had come over in the Atlantean period were given the coding for very specific portions of the grids, the planetary grids, that you would get each other through. You would be guided to those areas. You would feel the need to move if you were not in those areas. The land entrustments were only if the beast came alive. They were only in that event. Otherwise, it was much more loose. These are like the seats on the ark that will float above the waters that come. It is going to be very odd, and it will take you a bit of time to begin to understand what this is going to look like. It will be progressively as if those of you who carry the bridge zone frequencies that can make this link, that literally the galactic and universal matrix is making, it will be as if you have a bubble around you, where things go on around you, but they seem to not hit you too hard. If you have a bit of karmic stuff to clear, they may hit you a little harder than you liked, but you'll still be standing. And progressively, the more you work with the frequencies of the Veka codes and the Eka codes, you will progressively find that bubble around you not only becomes a true protection field for you, but you will begin to feel it grow, where you will begin to feel that your field stretches out, and you will feel that when people are in your field, for those times they are safe. You will begin to feel yourself as a walking bridge zone, as a walking portal, some more than others, depending on what's in the DNA. It isn't going to be a bang zoom fast separation. It's not going to be cataclysm comes tomorrow morning, then we all wake up and see who's standing. It's going to be slow and painful, where one incident happens, another event of this kind, another event of this kind. But there will be quite a few soul groups leaving completely from this planet. If you can realize that some of them are choosing to leave, to follow the path of Arimathea, it was a choice they made before. These will be people who do not want to hear what you have to say about this work. If you can find enough love in your heart for them, whoever they might be, your worst enemy or the person you love more than anything, that's the hardest, to love enough to let go sometimes. There is the polarization wave coming through, which means the people who have the frequencies and whose particles and whose scalar waves in their templates are at a particular angle, that is the angle of the bridge zone transition, they will go one way. And peoples that have their frequency and their particles and their scalar waves aligned with the Metatronic pattern, those who do not have at least 30% of their templates cannot pull it back. There's no time left to do that. They will go the Wisadek way. But there is mercy in this path, because These are people who have, for many generations since Atlantis, incarnated following creator gods. They chose to follow them, probably most of the time because they came from them in the first place. They wanted their freedom. They want their gods, by whatever names they call them. They will have this there. They will not be told. They will not know. They have a final evolution there that leads back to return home through space dust. Space dust is not bad, but they have been programmed for this, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. They have been programmed already. But they have several billion years of energy that's been siphoned off other things in that matrix. So they have a long playground to play before that time. There is a mercy in the way all of these things transpire. There will be much more to talk about on these things, but one of the most important things that you can do for yourself and for anyone around you, including your cat or your dog or your bird or your plant, because you can bring them through. If your fields become as walking bridge zones, which they can, if you can successfully activate the Ruche pillars within your body. This is the areas in the body that they come through the Kathara grid. That corresponds directly to the cosmic Ruche, which is this one. Okay, we gotta go soon. Okay, there. I'm well over time, they're telling me. Anyway, it corresponds to this, which is the Akasha Ea level. All right? Now, using the Eka codes and the Veka codes and the scepter codes, which we are progressively bringing to you as they activate the planetary grids, because they cannot be translated into the planetary fields until they begin activation in the planetary grids. That's why we get them piece by piece. These are the things that will activate the 12 pillars within your bodies. These are the things that will make you walking portals of God, that will be able to hold up other beings, yourself, but also pieces of land. You will create arcs, like Noah's Ark. Certain areas, the arcs will link together, and through the people who do this, they will be able to hold together a string of arcs, like a picture many boats strung together with a big one at the fore, pulling the rest. You will be able to pull a large portion of the planetary grids through into the bridge zone, safety zone. This is just the beginning of releasing this information, and I'm told we have to go because I'm way over. Yes, we have to go. Yes, seriously late. We will speak more tomorrow. They're saying we will speak more tomorrow. They will be back. We will do the Paxos journey, and there are some interesting things that are going to come from there as well. So this is the beginning of a new path of Genesis. Path of Genesis that will lead you to places you once knew but have long forgotten.
Thank you, Martin.
Welcome. Okay, I think I'll sit briefly. Az is out getting the 2 Mylars made that I've been working on all day for this presentation. It was worth taking the time to finish them up, and they're not finished enough where I'm going to hand them out to you. You'll get them tomorrow with the rest of the Metatron workshop, because there's the history of the Metatron stuff that we're doing tonight, and then tomorrow is, as it says on the itinerary, we'll do Metatronics today, what it means to us, and, you know, why we need to even know about it. Yeah. But for this evening's presentation, the subject matter, that everything is in the Metatron workshop, remember? Okay. The subject matter is very ancient subject matter. The subject matter has to do with the history of our planet, but not just our planet, a history of our race, a history of this time matrix. It's a history that goes back literally 950 billion years in Earth translation of time. That's a long time. There are certain series of events that took place that created the framework and the context for which we have our existence right now. Up until 9558 BC, which wasn't that long ago, we were aware as a peoples of this history. we were aware of our position within the drama. Can you please position that somewhere other than in my eyes? All right. Does it have to be right in my eyes, Dan?
I don't know. There's no lights.
You look like an avatar right now. You're just a big burst of light. I can't see you. You're like, you disappeared, but you have this great aura. Okay. Now, it's interesting, to say the least, to try to communicate this information to people in this time frame, because we've been so lost for so long. It seems like we're in the right place. You can get somebody lost, stick them in the middle of the woods, have somebody tell them they always lived there, and they'll believe you, because they don't have any other memory. We have the memory of these times and of this story. It's encoded in our DNA, but it's been turned off like a light switch for a very long time. There were records of all of these events. There still are records. Fortunately, somebody has been keeping records. The records of the CDD plates, the Cloister d'Oratour plates, they hold vast amounts of information. They take information directly and code it literally from the scalar matrix of the template of the time matrix itself. So even various versions of the CDD plates, because we have free will in this system, there are various what are called probable realities. Probable reality systems that if you at any moment point, there are a number of options available in a free will system. Now, that's on a personal level. That's why we have free will choice. If there weren't, we would simply be predestined and we'd be little puppets of some creator God that was directing us around. But our system has free will within a greater framework of order. That means we have free will of choice within a certain framework, and that framework is the framework of universal physics. When it comes down to some basic ways the universe